Hello everyone, and welcome back to MrDarxnight. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. In the heart of rural Appalachia lies a forest locals refuse to enter after dark. They call it Blackwater, because what goes in doesn't always come out. Whispers echo through the trees. Victims vanish without a trace. And the only clue ever found? A bloodstained shoe, and a 911 call that ends in terror. He's not human, his mouth, it's too wide. This is not just a ghost story. It's real, and it's never been solved. In the early autumn of 1987, a chilling call was received by the Monroe County 911 dispatch in the early hours of the morning. The caller identified herself as Emily Carter, a 19-year-old local girl who had reportedly gone hiking the day before. Her voice was barely audible, fractured by static, as if the signal itself were being strangled by the dense, mountainous forest surrounding her. The dispatcher could make out only fragments of her terrified whispering. He's not human, his mouth, it's too wide. And then, silence. The call was traced to a wooded area deep within Blackwater Forest, a remote region of the Appalachian range that had long carried a reputation for odd occurrences. For decades, locals had spoken in hushed tones about strange sounds, disappearing animals, and lights in the sky, but those were always dismissed as folklore. This was different. This was real. A young woman was missing, and the only clue was her own haunting voice transmitted through the crackling darkness. Search teams were dispatched immediately. They combed the area for days, trudging through steep ravines and dense underbrush. Dogs picked up a scent but lost it repeatedly near a stream that led deeper into the forest. Helicopters circled overhead, using heat-sensing equipment with no success. The terrain was difficult, the weather uncooperative. Emily was gone, and there was no sign of struggle, no torn clothing, no blood, no tracks. Just emptiness. 3 weeks later, her body was found half-buried beneath a pine tree off an unmarked trail, discovered by 2 hunters from out of town. What disturbed authorities and the public alike was not just the discovery itself, but the condition of the body. Emily had not been mauled by an animal. There were no defensive wounds, no clear indication of cause of death. But her limbs had been posed deliberately, arms extended outward, palms up, feet placed together, head tilted skyward. Around her neck was a ring of twine braided with feathers, as though part of a ritualistic display. The case would ignite local media for months. Emily Carter wasn't the first person to vanish in or near Blackwater Forest, but she was the first whose final moments had been partially recorded. The 911 call was never officially released to the public, but a partial transcript was leaked by an anonymous source inside the sheriff's department. The details painted a picture not of an attack, but of psychological terror, whispers, footsteps, a presence that stalked her from the trees. She mentioned seeing eyes that weren't eyes, and a mouth that stretched too far, but never elaborated. Some believed she was hallucinating. Others weren't so sure. The FBI briefly got involved, citing the potential for a serial offender or cult activity in the region. Yet no forensic evidence pointed to another human being present at the scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, no fibers, nothing. Her clothing was intact, her shoes arranged neatly beside her. One shoe had a bloodstain on the tongue, yet her body had no external injuries. Toxicology found no drugs or alcohol. Her cause of death was listed as undetermined. As with most rural mysteries, the official story eventually faded. Interest waned, media moved on, and Emily's name became just another entry in a long list of Appalachian tragedies. But her case marked a turning point for the community of Monroe County. Locals began avoiding the forest entirely. Once a popular spot for weekend hikes, Blackwater became abandoned. Trail markers were removed, access roads left unmaintained. A quiet fear settled over the area. Hunters who used to frequent the woods found other game lands. Locals stopped letting their children explore past the tree line. Whispers began to circulate, both literal and metaphorical. Campfire stories resurfaced about a thing in the woods that could mimic human voices. Children spoke of nightmares involving a man with no eyes and a mouth that never stopped smiling. Old-timers shared forgotten tales about a forest devil with skin like bark and a voice like dry leaves. None of these stories had ever been taken seriously, until Emily's voice, frail and shaking, was caught on tape begging for help from something she couldn't even describe. It wasn't just her words. It was the raw panic behind them. A kind of primal fear that couldn't be faked. A terror that still echoes through the local memory, a whisper that never quite goes silent. Blackwater Forest remains untouched to this day. No further searches have been conducted. No trail maps have been updated. Officially, the case remains unsolved. Unofficially, it started something much darker, a legacy of silence, shadow, and suspicion. Emily Carter became more than just a victim. She became a warning. And in Monroe County, they still say, if you hear your name whispered in the trees, don't answer. It's not your voice. And it's not calling you back. Blackwater Forest lies nestled on the edge of Monroe County, bordered by steep ridges, crumbling mining roads, and a dozen small towns that haven't changed much in the last 50 years. The land is deceptively beautiful. Rolling hills, thick canopies, moss-covered stone walls, and forgotten logging paths that twist deeper than any map will show. It's a place where nature reclaims everything, and boundaries vanish between past and present. To outsiders, it's just another patch of untouched Appalachian wilderness. To locals, it's something else entirely. Officially, the forest spans nearly 60,000 acres, but local records conflict with government maps. Some trails appear and disappear from different versions. Satellite images show shadowed clearings that don't exist when searched for on foot. A former surveyor once claimed that the forest folds in on itself, but no one ever published his findings. Cartographic inconsistencies have become a common theme when it comes to Blackwater. GPS devices fail unpredictably in the area. Compasses spin or point due south regardless of direction. Signal interference is rampant. Even professional hikers have admitted to feeling turned around in places they know well. Just beyond the forest's border sits the town of Dagger Creek, population 714. It's a tight-knit, quiet place. One main road, a diner, 2 churches, and an auto repair shop. There's a post office, though mail comes late and leaves early. People still wave at each other on porches. But if the subject of the forest comes up, conversation stops. Ask about Emily Carter and you'll get either silence or a rehearsed shrug. It's not because people have forgotten. It's because they remember all too well. The town itself carries a strange weight. Buildings seem older than they should be, even when freshly painted. Windows are kept closed even in the heat of summer. Few children play outdoors after dusk. Those who grew up there recall stories told in whispers, warnings disguised as bedtime tales. Don't go beyond the third bend in the trail. Don't answer voices you hear when you're alone. And never, under any circumstances, say your full name in the forest. Some dismiss it all as folklore, but even skeptics admit that something about Blackwater is different. Historically, the area around Dagger Creek has seen more than its share of vanishings. Between 1910 and 1987, at least 22 people went missing in or around the forest. The majority were written off as accidents, hunters who lost their way, campers caught in flash floods, hikers unprepared for the terrain. But the details rarely added up. Often, the bodies were never found. In some cases, personal items, backpacks, boots, photographs, would appear weeks later in strange locations, completely clean and dry, as though deliberately placed. A fisherman once found a woman's jacket folded neatly on a rock in the middle of a stream. There were no footprints leading to or from it. Attempts to catalog these cases have met resistance. Newspaper archives are missing key articles. Old police reports are incomplete, with pages mysteriously redacted or reclassified. Families who tried to push for answers were told to stop asking questions. One local journalist, who began investigating the Carter case and its connection to other disappearances, quit suddenly and left town. Her final column simply read, "We know. We just don't say it out loud." Some believe the forest itself hides more than just lost hikers. A few speak of underground structures, abandoned mines that were never marked on official records, strange shafts hidden beneath root systems, and tunnels too symmetrical to be natural. Others have theorized about military installations or Cold War bunkers. One unverified account came from a man who claimed to stumble upon a metal hatch embedded in a rock face. When he returned the next day with friends, it was gone. More unsettling are the rumors that the forest is older than any map or treaty suggests. Indigenous oral histories speak of a place they refuse to settle, describing it as where the shadows carry names. While these stories are rarely shared with outsiders, fragments have surfaced through historical research. One tale mentions a spirit with a twisted mouth and long arms that feeds on recognition. Another warns not to mimic the dead, or they might answer. Even wildlife patterns in the forest are abnormal. Entire species vanish for seasons at a time, only to reappear suddenly. Coyotes won't cross certain ridgelines. Birds avoid entire sections, leaving vast stretches eerily silent. Hunters have noted strange behavior in deer, standing completely still for hours, watching something invisible in the trees. Game cameras placed near the core of the forest frequently malfunction or capture only static, despite full batteries. Whether it's coincidence, local superstition, or something more, Blackwater Forest resists observation. It evades understanding. The deeper one digs into its geography, its history, and the lives of those who live around it, the more apparent it becomes that the forest is not just a setting for horror, it is the horror. A boundaryless, breathing entity that punishes curiosity and rewards silence. And perhaps that's why, for over a century, people have learned to live near it, but never with it. Before Emily Carter's voice echoed through the emergency dispatch line, before whispers became warnings, the mystery of Blackwater Forest had already begun to root itself deep into local memory. In the summer of 1982, 5 years before Emily's final call, a college student named John Mallory disappeared without a trace while hiking in the outer perimeter of the forest. His case would become the first officially recorded vanishing tied directly to Blackwater and, over time, would be recognized as the first in a series that seemed to follow an inexplicable, chilling pattern. John was 22 years old, a botany major from the University of Kentucky. He had come to Monroe County on a research trip to collect plant samples and document unusual fungal growths reported by park rangers in the region. His journals, recovered from the bed of his truck after his disappearance, indicated a fascination with the area's unique ecology, particularly a species of pale, bioluminescent moss that, according to his notes, should not exist at this altitude or latitude. His entries grow increasingly erratic in tone near the end, referencing clusters of dead birds, disrupted magnetic fields, and a strange low hum at dusk. Mallory entered Blackwater on July 6, 1982. According to ranger records, he registered at the southern trailhead and planned a 3-day solo trek. He was experienced, well-equipped, and known among his peers for meticulous preparation. But on July 9th, when he failed to return, authorities launched a full-scale search. For 10 days, over 40 people combed the trails with dogs, helicopters, and infrared sensors. All they found was his compass, half buried in a patch of disturbed soil, and a trail marker with deep, deliberate claw-like gouges carved into the wood. What made Mallory's case stand out, even at the time, was the complete lack of physical evidence. There were no signs of struggle, no environmental hazards like flash floods or landslides, and no animal activity in the area. The forest where he vanished appeared untouched, almost eerily still. The searchers reported an absence of birdsong, an overwhelming silence, and one unsettling consistency. Every night at roughly the same hour, some swore they heard someone calling for help, in John's voice. By the time the search was called off, the town had already begun whispering. They spoke of an old boundary, an invisible threshold within the forest that marked where the natural world ended and something else began. The older generation remembered stories from their grandparents, tales of travelers who went in chasing shadows and never came out. But until John's disappearance, most had dismissed them. Now, people weren't so sure. Over the next 5 years, 4 more disappearances occurred under nearly identical circumstances. In 1983, a married couple on a camping trip vanished from their tent site, their campfire still burning, their shoes left outside, their backpacks untouched. In 1984, a park ranger named Ellis Warren failed to return from his patrol route. His radio was found a mile from his cabin, turned on, battery drained, but still tuned to the emergency frequency. In 1985, 2 teenagers dared each other to explore the forest at night. One returned in a state of shock, unable to speak. The other was never found. In each of these cases, there were peculiar overlaps, objects placed strangely, electronic devices malfunctioning, and the same unsettling silence from the forest. Survivors, when there were any, spoke of disorientation, losing time, and being watched. Most importantly, in nearly every report, the phrase "it smiled at me" appeared in some form, scribbled in journals, muttered under breath, or etched into nearby trees. At the time, this was dismissed as stress-induced hallucination. But the repetition could not be ignored. By the time Emily Carter disappeared in 1987, investigators were beginning to realize they were dealing with more than just isolated tragedies. Unofficially, a pattern had emerged, always in the same geographic zone, always around midsummer, and always involving unexplained audio phenomena. Several dispatchers, unrelated to Emily's case, had logged strange calls over the years. Static-filled lines with breathing, unintelligible murmurs, or what sounded like two voices speaking at once in monotone. None could ever be traced. Locals started referring to that portion of the woods as the mouth. No one remembers where the term came from, but the meaning was understood. It was the place that opened up and swallowed people whole, leaving only echoes behind. As the pattern developed, so did the fear. New hiking routes were redrawn to circle away from that region. Local guides quietly refused to take visitors anywhere near the core of the forest. Hunting permits declined. Rumors spread that even deer avoided the area. John Mallory's family never received closure. His disappearance remains officially unsolved, and the case file, like so many tied to Blackwater, contains more questions than answers. Over time, his name has faded from the headlines, overshadowed by more recent and more gruesome stories. But for those who have followed the forest's history closely, John was the beginning, the first in a line of vanishing voices lost in the trees. What started with a single missing student slowly evolved into a phenomenon, a living legend built on gaps in logic and the chilling regularity of the unexplained. And though each case seems different on the surface, the core remains unchanged. Someone walks into Blackwater, and something else walks out. What distinguished the Blackwater disappearances from ordinary missing persons cases wasn't just the frequency or the isolation, it was the condition in which victims, when found, were presented. Not merely dead. Not lost to nature or accidents. But arranged. Placed. Positioned in ways that defied randomness or instinct. These weren't scenes of struggle, nor were they easily categorized as suicides or animal attacks. Instead, what investigators uncovered suggested intentionality, careful, deliberate ritualism. Emily Carter's discovery drew attention because of the whispering 911 call, but what lingered in the minds of those who saw her crime scene were the details of her body's placement. Her arms had been extended outward at perfect angles, her palms up, her legs drawn tightly together and angled as if forming an arrow pointing back toward the forest's center. Beneath her body was a flattened bed of pine needles that had not been disturbed, almost as though her body had been lowered, not dragged or dropped. Around her were small items, a circle of river stones, a single feather lodged in the twine around her neck, and a pile of ash that tested negative for wood or organic combustion. Some investigators noted her expression, vacant, but not fearful. Others were more disturbed by the unnatural openness of her mouth, as though something had forced it wider than normal and then carefully reset it. Her eyes were open, fixed, locked toward the forest line. While many assumed this was an isolated case, records from earlier disappearances began revealing eerie commonalities. The married couple from 1983, when finally located months later, had been found at the base of a collapsed mining shaft. Their bodies were partially decomposed but still seated back to back, hands resting on their knees, heads tilted to the sky. No trauma. No damage. Just a quiet, symmetrical death. Around them, etched into the dirt, were circular patterns of symbols no one could interpret, jagged, repeating lines intersecting in unnatural symmetry, like an alphabet that didn't belong to any human language. These symbols were later compared to Appalachian folk markings found in early settler cabins, often carved into doorways or ceiling beams to ward off evil. But the ones found near the bodies bore no exact match to protective charms. They seemed instead to invite something in. Spiral patterns. Teeth-like chevrons. Loops with no breaks. Repeating structures that suggested both containment and worship. An even earlier case, that of Park Ranger Ellis Warren in 1984, had similar details. Though his body was never recovered, his ranger station was found undisturbed, save for a single disturbing clue, a deer skull placed on the threshold of his cabin door, upside down, filled with river water, and surrounded by sharpened sticks stuck into the ground like a crown. This was not the work of an animal. This was not chance. Speculation began to swirl among those who studied the case patterns. If this was not the work of a serial killer, no signatures, no tools, no tracks, then what exactly was it? A cult? A hermit dwelling deep in the woods with esoteric beliefs and a long history of ritual sacrifice? Or was it something older, something embedded in the land itself, acting through unknown mechanisms, mimicking religious rites for reasons lost to time? Some theories pointed to local legends about forest devils or mimic men from pre-colonial myths. Entities said to lure humans by imitating the familiar voices, names, the sound of family members calling through the woods. These figures were never clearly described. They were not ghosts, nor animals. They were listeners, observers, things that waited for invitation, then performed rituals of their own, rituals not meant for human eyes to understand. Forensic analysts brought in from outside the region found themselves baffled. There were no clear points of trauma. No ligature marks, stab wounds, or bullet entries. Blood was absent in most cases or found far away from the bodies, if at all. Internal organs often showed signs of collapse without rupture. Bones sometimes displayed unnatural curvature, as though subjected to intense pressure and then restored. Yet skin remained untouched. Victims found in Blackwater shared more than just placement. They exhibited signs of prolonged exposure to unknown environments, pollen traces from plants not native to the region, soil embedded in fingernails that didn't match surface samples, and in rare cases, minute amounts of heavy metals in the bloodstream, including cadmium and tellurium, elements often found in deep rock layers or near volcanic fissures. If ritual was at play, it was not a human ritual in the traditional sense. It carried no signs of ideology, no altars, no text, no sacrificial weapons. It was mimicry in itself. Repeated placements, circular geometry, death without struggle, and bodies posed like offerings. Someone, or something, was following a process, but the intent behind it remained maddeningly elusive. These patterns would become the hallmark of Blackwater's darkness. Not just that people vanished, but that those who returned were arranged with the care of a funeral, without the soul of one. The forest didn't just kill, it performed. It displayed. It offered its silence as a statement. In time, investigators would stop releasing photos of recovered scenes. The public was told it was out of respect for the families. But those who'd seen the images knew the truth. The real reason was much simpler. The bodies weren't just dead. They were trying to tell us something. The Carter case brought national attention to Blackwater Forest, but its sinister legacy had begun long before her voice ever reached the dispatcher's line. Beneath the surface of public records, a deeper, fragmented timeline reveals disappearances stretching back more than a century. While local authorities always treated each incident as isolated, explaining them away as natural misfortune or human error, there is a different truth buried in the patterns. The vanishings began in the 1800s. The forest has always taken people. The only thing that's changed is who's still keeping the ledger. In 1871, an entire homesteading family went missing near the southeastern edge of what is now Blackwater. At the time, the land was still unincorporated, carved up into crude farming plots and logging sites. The Simmons family, 2 parents and 3 children, were last seen alive at church in Dagger Creek. A neighbor stopped by 3 days later to borrow tools and found the house abandoned. Food was half prepared on the table. The fire had burned down to ash. A child's shoe was found near the woodpile, stained dark, though the doctor who examined it claimed it wasn't blood. Their livestock remained untouched, doors unbroken, beds unmade. There were no signs of struggle, just absence. The incident became one of the earliest written accounts in Monroe County to be labeled unexplained disappearance. It remained an unsolved mystery, until a century later when a university researcher digitizing 19th-century police logs noticed the phrasing in the Simmons file was identical to a 1929 case involving 2 civilian Conservation Corps workers who vanished while surveying the early park system. Their last recorded location was within a half-mile of where the Simmons cabin once stood. The connection was subtle, but not random. Throughout the 20th century, dozens of disappearances were documented in the surrounding counties, always near the shifting edges of Blackwater. Most were unremarkable at first glance: trappers who never returned, drifters without families, itinerant workers lost to the woods. In each case, the names faded into background noise, their stories undocumented beyond a line in a sheriff's ledger. But the further one traces these cases, the more inconsistencies appear. Time stamps don't match. Coroner reports are lost. Topographic coordinates get swapped or erased. By the 1950s, a new trend had emerged: gaps in the record. Names went missing from registries. Newspaper clippings disappeared from archives. Photographs were filed under incorrect dates, then later marked as restricted access. One case from 1961 involved a group of Boy Scouts on a weekend hike. According to early dispatch records, one of the scout leaders reported hearing laughter coming from two directions at once. That night, one of the boys, age 12, vanished from his tent. No tracks were found. The troop had camped on dry soil, yet no imprint of the child's movement was ever located, not even by bloodhounds brought in the next morning. The only item recovered was the boy's neckerchief, nailed to the bark of a white pine, 30 feet off the ground. Cases like this were rarely shared publicly. Forest officials quietly adjusted maps, closed certain trails for erosion control, and discouraged further exploration in known hot zones. Files were rewritten or sealed, usually citing insufficient evidence or non-criminal disappearance. A pattern of quiet bureaucratic suppression formed, one that would repeat itself again and again over the following decades. The town's own history books mention an unofficial nickname given to Blackwater during the Great Depression: the Bleeding Grounds. It was a phrase whispered more than written, referring to a string of bodies found at the forest's perimeter. These individuals were often transient workers from the coal industry, men who had reportedly gone off to hunt or scout for new mineral lines. When their remains were discovered, weeks, sometimes months later, they showed identical signs: no obvious cause of death, limbs unnaturally angled, eyes open and fixed, sometimes missing their tongues or teeth, with no trauma visible. Several were found buried just beneath the topsoil, as if the forest had tried, poorly, to return them. There are also indications that early law enforcement officials knew more than they were willing to share. A 1942 memo between Monroe County Sheriff and the state police, declassified decades later, read simply, "Another incident near the curve. Do not involve media. Avoid National Parks Office if possible." The memo's margins contain a hand-drawn sigil, a crude eye, surrounded by branching lines. Researchers who later discovered it found matching versions scratched into trees in the deeper woods of Blackwater, often near where victims were last seen. In 1976, a geologist named Ira Benford began compiling these patterns into a self-published manuscript called Echoes in the Pines. The book was dismissed as speculative pseudoscience and received little attention. But Benford's handwritten notes, recovered after his sudden death in 1980, revealed a far more organized framework. He had documented 43 disappearances within a 30-mile radius, all exhibiting one or more shared details: missing time, symmetrical body positioning, absence of trauma, animal avoidance, and acoustic anomalies. Most importantly, he identified specific dates when disappearances were more likely to occur, always aligning with solar transitions, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar eclipses. He referred to these events as threshold periods. Benford died in a car accident on a dry road with no skid marks. His notes were passed to a colleague, who reportedly went missing himself 2 years later while hiking Blackwater's northern range. Only his recorder was found, batteries melted inside, the tape looped with a single whisper playing over and over. "Come look." The forest had been taking people long before anyone thought to call it mysterious. Blackwater's darkness is not recent. It is historical. It is methodical. It is ancient. And when viewed through the lens of time, each vanishing is not a mystery, but a chapter. A page in a book that someone, or something, keeps writing. Among the most unsettling elements surrounding the Blackwater forest phenomenon are the audio artifacts, recordings that have surfaced over the years from missing persons cases, amateur investigators, hikers, and even official law enforcement channels. These audio fragments, some brief and others hours long, have formed a chilling secondary archive, one that doesn't rely on visual evidence or physical remains, but on sound. Sounds that defy logical explanation. Sounds that suggest the forest does more than watch. The most infamous of these recordings remains the 911 call placed by Emily Carter in 1987. It wasn't the first, but it marked the beginning of public awareness. That whisper, transmitted across a crackling line, introduced a now familiar fear to authorities, a victim describing something that cannot be described. Emily's words, "He's not human, his mouth, it's too wide," became a warning etched into local consciousness. But buried within the static of her final moments was another anomaly, a faint echo in the background, not her voice, but something imitating it. Analysts described it as an imperfect mirror, repeating the phrase, "he's not human" seconds after she said it, slower, lower, and tonally detached. No one else was confirmed to be with her. The audio was later studied by sound engineers and forensic audio specialists. Some attributed the effect to frequency distortion, possibly caused by damaged radio towers or atmospheric interference. Others disagreed, noting that the echo had structure, modulation, and what one expert called intent. The second voice, while similar to Emily's, bore characteristics inconsistent with human vocal range, subtle distortions, unnatural timing, and a total lack of breath or background motion. It was as if the forest itself had listened and tried to respond. This wasn't an isolated event. In 1992, a pair of local podcasters attempting to document Appalachian anomalies entered Blackwater's western boundary equipped with reel-to-reel tape recorders, hoping to capture animal sounds. They never returned. Weeks later, a hiker found one of their recording devices near an abandoned fire pit. The tape was intact. Its contents were mostly ambient, leaves rustling, distant water, brief voices discussing equipment. Then, without warning, the voices ceased. What followed was 26 minutes of silence, broken by a whisper that repeated a phrase over and over. "Do you hear it?" The whisper was not tied to any of the known podcasters. It came from very close to the microphone, with no indication of movement, no rustling, and no accompanying environmental sound. It did not breathe. At times, the pitch dropped to frequencies difficult for the human ear to detect, and at others, it spiked so sharply it damaged playback heads. Every attempt to clean the audio or isolate the voice resulted in system crashes, tape corruption, or, in one case, an audio technician refusing to work further on the project, stating only, "It talked back." There are multiple instances of wildlife trackers and backcountry search teams encountering similar phenomena. In 2005, a search and rescue team responded to the disappearance of an elderly hiker. Their radios, tuned to the emergency band, picked up an unexpected signal from deep within the no-service zone of Blackwater Center. The voice on the transmission repeated the hiker's name, not shouted, but whispered calmly in what was later described as his own voice. The missing man had no radio. The team followed the signal's direction but found only an empty clearing with no footprints, no sign of recent movement, and no natural echo chamber that could explain the propagation. The recording of the signal captured not only the repeated whisper, but also a faint rhythmic clicking sound beneath the voice, like bone tapping on bone. It was dismissed as interference. But later that year, another team reported hearing the same clicking in an entirely different quadrant of the forest. Patterns emerged. The voices on the recordings frequently mimicked known victims. Their cadence, words, and sometimes full phrases would match voicemail messages, journal entries, or previous radio conversations. But experts reviewing the files identified subtle abnormalities, misplaced vowels, inverted word order, and odd punctuation. As though the voice wasn't speaking the sentence, but reading it, phonetically, without understanding. In some cases, the recordings were found when no one had even been present. Trail cameras fitted with audio sensors would trigger and record nothing but a distant lullaby or an unintelligible chant. The pitch and rhythm shifted each time it was played back. When slowed down, one loop contained layered voices speaking over one another, but none matched any local dialects. One notable file surfaced in 2014. A group of cryptid researchers claimed to have captured over an hour of forest ambient sounds, but their equipment malfunctioned halfway through. The digital file survived. Analysis revealed, buried deep in the audio's waveform, a signature human voice saying, "It waits beneath." This voice did not appear in real-time playback, but only when visualized spectrographically. Sound technicians have since noted this kind of imprint is not typical of environmental or accidental noise. It suggests programming, deliberate embedding. What disturbs most who encounter these recordings is not their content, but the sensation they provoke. Listeners have reported nausea, disorientation, and vertigo. Some develop persistent tinnitus. A few, especially those who've listened with headphones, claim they continued hearing the whisper after playback ended, as if the sound had entered more than just their ears. In the world of forensic audio, context matters. But the voices of Blackwater exist outside of normal experience. They are messages with no senders. Echoes with no source. The forest doesn't just consume. It repeats. It performs. It learns. And through its whispered mimicry, it invites the next listener to come closer. Among the many whispered legends passed down through generations in the Appalachian region, few are as enduring or as disturbing as that of the smiling man known by different names across counties. The pale grin, old wide mouth, the man who waits. The stories all share key features. An unnatural figure that imitates human behavior, watches from the tree lean, and lures its victims by speaking in the voice of someone they trust. In Dagger Creek and surrounding towns, the legend is not just folklore, it's a quiet explanation for what the law refuses to clarify. Descriptions of the smiling man vary, but common elements recur across decades. Witnesses, both historical and modern, report a male figure standing motionless in the forest, often at dusk. He appears too tall, his limbs too long, his mouth stretched far beyond the limits of natural anatomy. The smile is not warm or expressive, it is fixed, like a slit torn across the face, teeth too numerous and uniform, exposed even when no expression is made. Most accounts describe the figure as wearing no visible clothing, or else wrapped in rags or hides that blend with the trees. The eyes, if seen at all, are often described as reflective but hollow, dark voids that mirror light but not life. What makes the legend especially unnerving is its consistency over time. An 1894 diary entry from a coal miner near Monroe County describes a figure, with a grin like a rip across its face, standing at the edge of the woods for 3 nights in a row. In 1937, a WPA field worker recorded oral histories from the region and noted repeated mentions of the laughing man in the pines, who calls you in the voice of your mama. In 1978, a Boy Scout leader filed an official report of a man with no lips and too many teeth watching the campsite from a ridge. He later retracted the statement. One particular aspect of the smiling man story stands out above the rest: his voice. Witnesses claim that he doesn't speak in his own words. Instead, he mimics. He waits until he hears a voice, sometimes from a victim, sometimes from a family member, and then uses that voice to call people deeper into the woods. The mimicry isn't perfect. It's often just off enough to create unease, pauses in the wrong places, syllables flattened or overly crisp, emotion stripped from the tone. A brother's voice with no affection. A mother's voice with no comfort. A loved one's voice delivered like a recording, not a memory. Those who claim to have heard it often describe a powerful compulsion to follow the sound, even when they knew it was wrong. Survivors speak of walking toward the voice despite feeling fear. One woman who escaped an encounter in 2003 said, "It felt like the sound was inside my chest, pulling my body forward." Others report confusion and memory gaps. Several claim they were called by their full names, something rarely used in daily life. In folklore, the use of a full name is often considered a form of magical binding. In Blackwater, it is a warning. In regional storytelling, the smiling man is often framed as a cautionary tale told to children to keep them from wandering into dangerous territory. Yet there is an edge to the stories that suggests more than just myth. Unlike other regional legends, such as Mothman, Bigfoot, or the Bell Witch, the smiling man has no single origin point, no media explosion, no tourist paraphernalia. He exists in low whispers, shared at kitchen tables and around fire pits. His image isn't drawn or dramatized. It is remembered. Several researchers who have investigated Blackwater and its associated phenomena note that the smiling man may not be a physical creature at all. Instead, they suggest it may represent a manifestation of the forest itself, an anthropomorphic shape given to a force that is more conceptual than biological. A predator, yes, but one that consumes identity, not just flesh. One that mimics voices not to speak, but to erase. In this interpretation, the smile becomes symbolic, a hollow approximation of human expression, stretched beyond recognition. Linguists who've studied the reported speech patterns of the voice-mimicking phenomena in Blackwater have noted irregularities that suggest non-human origin. Phrasing often lacks regional inflection. Words are repeated unnecessarily. The structure mimics human speech without understanding emotional context. In some cases, the voice uses phrases out of time, expressions popular decades earlier, suggesting a patchwork of stolen dialogue. These anomalies further support the theory that the smiling man, or whatever intelligence lies behind him, is not imitating to communicate. It is imitating to lure, to bait, to feed. The The psychological profile of reported encounters aligns with symptoms of infrasound exposure and sensory disorientation, similar to those experienced by individuals subjected to certain military-level acoustic testing. Victims often report vertigo, nausea, memory loss, and time distortion. Combined with the voice mimicry, these elements suggest an advanced form of predation, one that doesn't chase, but waits. That doesn't strike, but invites. A predator that studies language, emotion, and familial memory, and then returns it as bait. The smiling man, whether real entity or collective hallucination, has become the forest's ambassador, its face, its whisper, its mask. Every community has its version. But in Blackwater, the consistency of his traits, the decades of testimony, and the silence of those who've seen him all point to something more than story. He is not a myth that explains the forest. He is the forest when it chooses to speak. The strangest detail about Blackwater Forest isn't the number of people who have vanished, the bizarre condition of the remains, or even the unexplained sounds captured deep within the trees. It is the silence. Not the silence of the forest itself, that peculiar, heavy stillness known to those who've stood in its core, but the silence of the people around it. The officials, the residents, the agencies. The refusal to speak, the selective memory, and the erasure of records. Blackwater is not just a location, it's an open secret, kept closed through generations of practiced omission. In Dagger Creek and nearby towns, the pattern becomes evident quickly. Ask too many questions, and conversations turn. Friendly faces dim. People find reasons to leave the room or change the subject. Residents speak of old tragedies in vague terms, that summer, the girl in the woods, or back when things were different. There is no denial. Instead, there is distance. As if the act of acknowledging the forest's history grants it strength. As if naming the thing invites it closer. This culture of suppression isn't simply born from fear, it's functional. Over time, certain families became gatekeepers of knowledge, quietly ensuring that questions didn't spread too far. Stories were passed down with precision, but never recorded. Children were warned in metaphors, not facts. Outsiders were discouraged from exploring off-marked trails, not with threats, but with 1,000 small gestures, wrong directions, sudden weather warnings, and closed gates. No one says, "Don't go." They just ensure you don't want to. Local law enforcement plays a peculiar role in this silence. Missing persons reports are filed, but rarely followed up in any meaningful way. Search operations, when launched, are brief and under-resourced. Officers will mark areas as cleared, despite no indication that ground teams have been deployed. When asked, departments cite budget issues or jurisdictional confusion with state authorities. Files go missing. Maps are misfiled. Calls are not returned. Over time, the paper trail frays until nothing of substance remains. One example occurred in 1998, when a group of amateur paranormal investigators from Richmond went missing after entering Blackwater. A week later, their vehicle was found abandoned on a fire road. Official documents list the event as case closed, suspected exposure. But private communication between a county deputy and a state trooper, later leaked to an online forum, reveals the truth. One of the searchers was found alive, but in a state of psychogenic shock. According to the message, she was found whispering her own name over and over and refused to acknowledge any human voice that addressed her. She had to be sedated. No official records of her recovery exist. Even higher authorities exhibit the same quiet dismissal. Requests for Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, records relating to Blackwater frequently return heavily redacted documents, or responses that no such files exist. Some documents refer vaguely to joint operations, survey interference, or environmental security, language typically associated with protected federal land or military activity. Yet there are no military installations listed within 50 miles of the forest, and environmental security concerns do not explain missing persons or audio anomalies. National park organizations have also shown reluctance to acknowledge incidents in the region. In one internal report, later leaked, park officials noted that Blackwater ranked among the top 10 areas for unexplained disappearances in the eastern U.S., yet it remains one of the least studied. Public trail maintenance stops abruptly near the forest's interior. Visitor brochures are vague. Online information is scant, and when trail closures are announced, the stated reasons are always natural causes: erosion, fire risk, seasonal flooding. Even the media has contributed, whether intentionally or not. Local papers have long avoided reporting on Blackwater stories, opting instead for sanitized obituaries or missing person blurbs with minimal detail. When regional or national outlets do take interest, stories are often redirected toward broader narratives: lost hikers, unprepared campers, dangerous terrain. The forest itself is rarely named. Instead, headlines focus on the human element: grief, tragedy, poor judgment, while sidestepping what lies at the center. Those who attempt to break this pattern often experience a strange pressure. Investigators lose funding. Independent researchers report harassment, lost equipment, or corrupted files. A local historian who compiled a map of all known disappearances near Blackwater died in a fire that destroyed his archives. Police labeled it an accident caused by faulty wiring. Neighbors say the power had been out for 2 days. This pattern suggests something more than local superstition. It suggests an ecosystem of silence, one that spans not just communities, but institutions. An unspoken agreement among those who live nearby and those who govern from afar. A shared understanding that certain truths cost too much to speak aloud. Whether this is due to fear, complicity, or something worse is still unknown. But the effect is undeniable. Blackwater remains largely undocumented, underinvestigated, and poorly understood, not by accident, but by design. The mechanisms of suppression may vary, but the outcome is the same. A forest with a known history of disappearances continues to operate in obscurity, guarded not by fences or soldiers, but by silence. The question is no longer why people don't talk. The question is, what happens if they ever do? Beyond the disappearances and the legends, one of the most baffling and disturbing elements of Blackwater Forest lies in its physical behavior. Maps become unreliable. Compass needles jitter. GPS devices fail to triangulate. People walk in straight lines and somehow return to their point of origin. Structures vanish from sight, even when within walking distance. The forest, by all measurable accounts, appears to shift around those who enter it. But unlike standard environmental phenomena, the disorientation in Blackwater isn't chaotic, it's patterned. It obeys a kind of hidden geometry, one that seems to operate by rules no one fully understands. For generations, hikers and researchers have reported strange spatial effects inside the deeper zones of Blackwater. Paths loop in impossible ways. Tree lines that appear fixed from a distance rearrange when approached. Trail markers are found upside down, backwards, or duplicated in locations hours apart. Some visitors walk for miles only to return to their starting point, despite having made no visible turns. The forest seems to fold time and space, creating the illusion of movement while trapping its victims within a limited perimeter. A 2001 study conducted unofficially by a group of Appalachian State University students involved mapping a 2-mile circuit in Blackwater's western quadrant. Using high-precision GPS tools and marking physical objects along the way, they attempted to form a perfect triangle circuit, returning to their start point. The GPS logs, when uploaded, showed their positions jumping erratically. At several intervals, the data implied they were occupying 2 locations simultaneously. Physical markers they placed, flagged stakes in the ground, were later found embedded in different soil types than they had recorded, and in some cases, half buried in frozen ground they hadn't encountered. The final result of the study was inconclusive, and the supervising professor later declined to publish the findings. Topographical inconsistencies have also been noted by forestry experts. Aerial imagery collected by satellite regularly shows slight discrepancies in elevation and tree density between scans taken only days apart. While seasonal variation can explain minor changes, the differences observed in Blackwater far exceed natural fluctuation. In several cases, whole clearings appear or disappear between images. One such instance involved a fire road logged in the 1970s that no longer exists, not overgrown, but erased. No vegetation reclaiming it. No sign it was ever there, except in older photographs and maintenance records. Cartographers working with LiDAR scanning technology attempted to construct a 3-dimensional model of the Central Forest Basin in 2015. The initial results showed a depression, an area nearly 600 feet across where the land appears unnaturally sunken and geometrically precise. Its shape was hexagonal, and its depth consistent. But when the same team returned with ground survey equipment, the basin could not be located. The coordinates pointed to a flat ridge with no abnormality. No trees had been cut. No landslide had occurred. The shape had simply vanished. This has led some researchers to theorize that Blackwater may operate as a form of non-Euclidean space. In mathematics and physics, non-Euclidean geometry allows for the existence of curved or warped spaces where the usual laws of perspective, distance, and orientation do not apply. In such an environment, straight lines can become circles, and movement in one direction may loop back upon itself. While this concept has long been applied in theoretical physics and cosmology, the notion that it could occur naturally, or intentionally, on Earth remains controversial. And yet, Blackwater continues to defy terrestrial logic. Biologists have also weighed in on the forest's peculiar behavior. Tree growth patterns in the deeper sectors often show abnormal spiraling or rotational curvature, with trunks that bend in coordinated arcs rather than random directions. Fungi colonies, particularly the bioluminescent species noted in earlier studies, grow in fractal formations rarely seen outside of laboratory-controlled conditions. Some researchers suspect these growths are responding to magnetic anomalies, but testing reveals no consistent data. Compasses spin or freeze entirely. Magnetometers short out. The deeper one goes, the less the equipment behaves like it's in the same world. Some of the most unnerving reports come from survivors of near disappearances, people who entered the forest, became lost, and somehow escaped. A recurring detail in their stories is the sense that space collapsed or folded. One man described walking downhill for nearly an hour, only to realize he had returned to a point above where he started. Another survivor said he watched the sun move across the sky too fast, minutes compressed into seconds. Others speak of repeated landmarks, as if the forest copied and pasted itself around them. What all of these phenomena point to is the possibility that Blackwater is not merely a location, it is a structure, a system, a designed space that mimics nature but behaves according to an internal logic. One that adapts, reacts, and perhaps even learns. The forest is not static. It is interactive. It responds to intrusion with confusion, and it uses space as a weapon. This may explain why rescue operations fail so frequently, and why so few footprints are ever found. Victims are not merely lost in the forest. They are removed from the normal laws of geography. Their ability to be found diminishes not because of distance, but because of dimensional shift. They do not vanish because they wander too far. They vanish because the forest changes around them, closing like a hand around prey. As the body count rises and testimonies mount, a chilling pattern begins to emerge, one that cannot be explained by coincidence or terrain. Within Blackwater Forest, there are specific zones where the fabric of normality becomes thinner. Places where light bends unnaturally, where sound behaves like it's being heard underwater, where time and space appear fractured, not metaphorically, but measurably. These areas, documented by researchers and silently avoided by locals, form a network of vanishing points, locations where people enter and simply cease to exist, with no physical evidence or environmental explanation. The concept of a vanishing point within the forest isn't new. It appears in early local accounts under different names: hollow spots, the quiet clearings, or pockets of the old air. Descriptions of these areas often include unnatural silence, no birdsong, no wind movement, not even the sound of one's own footsteps at times. Some who've stumbled into them report sudden changes in pressure, as if the atmosphere itself thickens. Others claim to experience momentary blindness, intense vertigo, or flashes of memories that are not their own. In one of the most studied incidents, a wildlife biologist in 1996 documented a specific ridge in the eastern quadrant of Blackwater where deer trails abruptly stopped. Not faded or scattered, just stopped, as if the animals refused to proceed past a certain invisible boundary. Camera traps placed in the zone repeatedly failed to capture any images, despite being triggered. Batteries drained within hours. The few images that were recovered showed only static, or worse, corrupted visuals with indistinct shapes, too blurred to identify, but structured in ways that didn't conform to natural motion blur. Something had passed in front of the lens, but not in a way cameras were built to register. Geomagnetic readings taken within known vanishing points reveal sudden spikes and troughs in intensity. In one case, a handheld Gauss meter recorded a fluctuation that should not be possible without industrial-level electromagnetic interference. There are no such facilities within a 100-mile radius. These EM pulses are suspected to affect the human nervous system, potentially contributing to the confusion, memory loss, and orientation failure reported by victims. Yet no source for these pulses has ever been located, nor any pattern identified that could explain their timing or origin. The most infamous of these areas lies near a moss-covered ravine locals refer to only as the Sink. Though no official maps label it, generations of hunters and hikers have avoided the area. According to oral tradition, it is a place where the forest listens back. Several disappearances have been traced to that vicinity, including a group of search and rescue volunteers who vanished during a second search for missing backpackers. The only item recovered was a searcher's walkie-talkie, found embedded in the mud with its transmit button fused down. The last recorded transmission was a single word, repeated in a broken tone, "Where?" Attempts to mark these points on GPS maps have proven futile. Coordinates recorded in real-time shift on playback. In one case, a team marked a location using physical tools, spray paint, biodegradable flags, and trail markers. Upon returning 3 days later, all markers were gone, and the terrain had altered. A stream had appeared where there was none before, and the forest floor was littered with bones, mostly small animals, arranged in a loose spiral. Some researchers suggest these vanishing points act like spatial weak spots, nodes where the boundaries between dimensions may be thinner. Theoretical physicists studying anomalous zones across the globe have compared these sites to quantum singularities, environments where traditional laws of time, light, and space behave unpredictably due to localized distortions. While these ideas remain speculative, Blackwater's vanishing points display qualities consistent with nonlinear spatial theory. If space can warp under pressure, then something, or someone, may be exerting that pressure deliberately. Victims linked to these zones often share unusual details. In multiple cases, watches found on the bodies were stopped at specific times, always corresponding to either 3:07 a.m. or 5:44 p.m., regardless of the actual time of death. These times, when plotted against solar and lunar alignment charts, often coincide with transitional thresholds, sunset, astronomical dusk, or moments of lunar culmination. Patterns like this have led some to believe that the forest, or whatever intelligence resides within it, operates according to a calendar that is not ours. More unsettling are those who return from the edge of these zones changed. Some experience what's known as derealization syndrome, a psychological state in which the world feels artificial or dreamlike. Others suffer intense paranoia, insomnia, and in rare cases, aphasia, loss of the ability to understand or produce language. One woman, found 2 days after vanishing near the Sink, had scratched symbols into her arms resembling those seen in ritualistic poses of earlier victims. She could not recall her name or how she got there, but she repeatedly drew spirals in the dirt and said one phrase in a flat tone, "It folds the world." No one knows how many of these vanishing points exist, because every expedition to fully chart them has failed. Equipment fails. Maps are useless. Memory degrades. And worst of all, people disappear. The zones seem to resist observation, erasing traces, breaking logic, and consuming evidence. The more one studies them, the less they seem like locations, and more like functions. They are not where people disappear. They are how. Scattered across the deepest, least charted areas of Blackwater Forest are signs of ritual. Not religious in the traditional sense, and not the result of modern cult activity. These remnants speak to something older, pre-colonial, pre-recorded, perhaps pre-human. Stone arrangements, burnt symbols, carved trees, and subterranean patterns suggest the forest has long been a site of ceremonial practice, or worse, a place of deliberate offering. Most of the artifacts found are hidden in places inaccessible without intent. Deep ravines, cliffside grottos, or forest hollows that require multiple days of travel on foot. Their presence often coincides with known vanishing zones and historical disappearance clusters. While some have attempted to dismiss these objects as remnants of Native American settlements, tribal historians in the region have strongly refuted that claim. According to several Cherokee and Shawnee scholars, the designs and construction methods found in Blackwater do not resemble indigenous spiritual sites. If anything, they say, the sites in question were deliberately avoided by native people, who consider the area wrongly born, a phrase interpreted to mean a location outside the natural order. One of the earliest confirmed reports of ritualistic structure came in 1904, when a group of loggers discovered a perfectly circular clearing deep in the western stretch of Blackwater. In the center was a crude altar made of stacked stone, blackened by fire, and surrounded by trees whose bark had been stripped in vertical lines from root to branch. The site was described in a brief note to the forestry department, but no formal investigation followed. When a modern researcher attempted to locate the site in 1991 based on hand-drawn maps from the period, she found only a depression in the earth, overgrown with moss but unmistakably circular. At the center was a single flat stone, etched with a spiral that matched no known language or symbology. These spiral motifs appear repeatedly in other forest discoveries. They are not ornamental. They appear in bone arrangements, in scorched vegetation patterns, and in faint carvings at unnatural intervals in tree bark. In one case, bones from various small animals, squirrels, raccoons, deer, even birds, were arranged in a triple spiral, with each spiral composed of a single species. The bones were unbroken, clean, and bleached in a way that suggests prolonged chemical exposure. No laboratory has successfully recreated the bleaching pattern without resorting to industrial solvents. Another artifact found in 1983, now kept under lock in a university archive, is a stone ring, flat, black, and etched with concentric circles that move inward at imperfect intervals. When viewed under ultraviolet light, faint tracings appear between the rings, forming what appears to be a star chart, though none matching visible constellations. The origin of the artifact is unknown. It was left anonymously in the mailbox of a local anthropologist shortly after she had published a paper on ritual site alignments in Blackwater. No one claimed responsibility. Across the eastern ridges, trees have been found bearing what appear to be natural scars, but when mapped collectively, the marks form geometric alignments that mirror early astrological diagrams. The trees are of varying ages, and yet the scarring is equidistant and consistent, as if the forest were growing around fixed instructions. This would require generational planning, which implies either a long-standing organized group or something non-human influencing growth. Dendrologists who studied the scar formations confirmed that many of the marks were created while the trees were saplings, meaning someone or something carved them knowing how they would develop. One particularly disturbing pattern involves the placement of objects near or within discovered ritual sites. Personal items from victims, shoes, broken glasses, necklaces, or even ID cards, have been found embedded in trees or partially buried in spirals of stone and ash. In multiple cases, these items were located months before official search teams recovered the remains. This suggests either a presence that observes disappearances in real time or an intelligence capable of manipulating the forest and its contents. The psychological atmosphere of these sites is equally consistent. Independent explorers and researchers report dizziness, nosebleeds, auditory hallucinations, and a pressing sense of observation. Animals refuse to approach. In one documented case, a trained cadaver dog collapsed upon entering a hollow ringed with bones. The handler described the animal's behavior as not fear, refusal. The dog's heartbeat dropped dangerously low, and it had to be evacuated and later retired due to chronic stress. Perhaps most telling is the calendar pattern observed in the discovery of these sites. Many are uncovered or revealed during solstices, equinoxes, or periods of lunar alignment. This recurrence strongly suggests a cyclical function. The forest is not just a passive environment. It acts in rhythm. It unveils. It hides. And it waits. This implies intent. The remains of rituals are not evidence of random horror or human superstition. They are messages, structures, traces of interaction between the forest and something, or someone, that understood how to shape space, perception, and behavior. Whether these rituals were conducted to protect, to summon, or to contain is unknown. But the forest remembers them. And the shapes etched into stone and bark, arranged in bones and fire, continue to repeat. In addition to the physical anomalies, disappearances, and unsettling folklore surrounding Blackwater Forest, a lesser-known but equally disturbing phenomenon has emerged over the past 2 decades. People who remember being in the forest, despite having no record, no companions, and no logical reason to have ever been there. These individuals, from towns both nearby and distant, often recall specific moments, landmarks, or sensations that closely match the experiences of verified victims. Yet their personal histories contain no gaps, and their families swear they were never missing. This phenomenon, often described as displaced memory imprinting, has puzzled psychologists, neurologists, and folklore researchers alike. In one documented case, a 32-year-old woman in Kentucky began having recurring nightmares of being lost in a pine forest, hearing her mother's voice calling her deeper into the woods. She drew detailed sketches of moss-covered stone circles and remembered the sensation of her feet sinking into mud laced with ash. These details matched the descriptions of a known vanishing point in Blackwater, despite her never having traveled to West Virginia, let alone visited the forest. The woman was later shown photographs from unrelated research files. Without being prompted, she pointed to a site known as Spiral Clearing, saying it was where the sky broke. The accuracy of her descriptions, down to the direction of the tree tilt and the broken stone at the center of the spiral, was impossible to dismiss. Yet there were no physical markers on her body, no trauma, no missing time. She was not a survivor. She had never gone missing. Still, her mind contained the experience. Cases like hers are not isolated. Therapists across the Appalachian region have documented similar recollections among patients with no direct or familial ties to the forest. In some instances, multiple people within the same community recall the same non-existent event: a child disappearing, a fire in the woods, or a creature with a face that doesn't blink. These events often correlate with local legends, but occur in timelines that do not align. When interviewed, the individuals speak with conviction, detail, and emotional resonance, hallmarks of real memory, not fantasy or suggestion. A university research team investigating group memory distortion conducted a controlled study in 2012, using fabricated news clippings about a fictional Blackwater disappearance. The goal was to measure suggestibility and the formation of false memories. Unexpectedly, several participants claimed they had already heard of the incident prior to the study, despite it being entirely invented. Some described visualizing the location, hearing audio associated with it, or even just knowing it happened. The fabricated case began to attract further online reports from unrelated individuals who insisted it was real. This has led to speculation that Blackwater is not simply a location, but a kind of psychological signal. It may transmit something: images, emotions, fragments of thought that embed themselves in susceptible minds. In neurological terms, these are referred to as intrusive recollections without source memory. Normally associated with trauma, this condition can be artificially triggered by sensory exposure, often to something unfamiliar or overwhelming. But in Blackwater cases, the exposure seems to occur without proximity. The forest reaches out. An analysis of the social networks of reported false memory experiencers reveals something more troubling: a clustering effect. Individuals who live near others who've had such recollections are statistically more likely to develop them themselves, even without direct communication. This suggests a contagion, mimetic or psychological, that moves through communities like a shadow, attaching itself to dormant parts of the subconscious. It spreads not through speech or reading, but through presence. Some researchers have turned to the theory of morphic resonance, a fringe concept proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake, which postulates that patterns of behavior and memory can be transmitted across populations via shared fields of consciousness. While largely dismissed in academic circles, the concept has found new interest in the context of Blackwater. If such a resonance exists, the forest may act as an amplifier or anchor, pulling in mental echoes from those who've entered and casting them outward to those on the periphery. There is also the possibility that these memories are not false at all, but fragmented remnants of something real, experiences erased by whatever force governs the forest, only to return later in dreams or distorted waking flashes. This theory aligns with reports of victims found in catatonic or dissociative states, who later remember nothing, but display inexplicable behaviors, avoiding mirrors, flinching at tree branches, or humming unfamiliar lullabies. These responses suggest suppressed or altered cognition, potentially the result of a traumatic encounter deliberately obscured or overwritten. In a particularly disturbing instance, a man in Ohio claimed to have dreamt of walking into Blackwater, guided by the voice of a woman whispering equations. He woke up with a drawn spiral on his arm, made in ink he did not own. Weeks later, he saw the same spiral etched into a stone during a televised documentary about Blackwater disappearances. He had never watched it before. He no longer dreams. Ultimately, these false memories, dream encounters, and shared hallucinations may not be errors in the mind, but footprints. They may be evidence of something that moves not only through woods and darkened clearings, but through thought itself. A presence that does not need to touch to leave a mark. That does not need to appear to be witnessed. Blackwater may not be calling victims physically. It may be calling mentally. It may be remembering people before they ever enter it, and inserting itself into lives it intends to one day take. Among the most unsettling pieces of evidence tied to Blackwater Forest are the audio recordings. These are not rumors or fragments of folklore, but actual files, tapes, digital tracks, and surveillance logs that have circulated quietly among researchers, law enforcement, and online communities. Some were recorded accidentally. Others were part of investigations. A few appeared anonymously, untraceable but consistent with verified events. What they all share are common features: distortion, mimicry, and frequencies that seem to alter listener perception the longer the sound plays. One of the earliest known recordings came from the 1987 disappearance of Caleb Porter, a documentary sound technician who had entered the forest to capture natural ambience. Only his recorder was found. The tape, recovered by a search and rescue team, contained 3 hours of typical forest sound: wind, birds, leaves shifting underfoot. But near the 4th hour, something changed. The soundscape flattened. No animals. No wind. Just a low hum, almost imperceptible, beneath what sounded like distant breathing. Then came a voice. It whispered Caleb's name 7 times. Each repetition grew more distorted. The final whisper was stretched, unnatural, as though the tape had been slowed and pitch shifted. Yet the recording was confirmed to be unaltered. Spectrographic analysis of the whisper revealed visual anomalies in the sound wave. Instead of organic patterns typical of human speech, the waveform showed fractal repetition, structures found more often in algorithmic sounds than in voice recordings. Audio engineers described it as too regular to be natural, too imperfect to be synthetic. This anomaly is not unique. Multiple Blackwater-related audio samples contain background signals that form near-identical spectrographs when analyzed, an impossible consistency unless caused by a singular, repeating source. Some theorize this is evidence of a signal or broadcast that permeates the forest. A subsonic presence layered beneath ordinary sound, undetectable to the ear, but perceived by the nervous system. It may not be meant to be heard. It may be meant to be felt. More recent recordings from body cams and drone mics show a new variation: mimicry. In several cases, the devices capture familiar human voices, often those of missing persons or the recorder themselves, calling out in tones that are almost right, but not quite. The cadence is broken. The pitch slightly elevated or dropped. The emotional tone absent. One particularly disturbing clip involves a ranger's body cam recording from 2014, in which his own voice is heard calling his name, despite him remaining silent. The voice echoes from a distance, calling, "Come see," in a flat, almost bored tone. When the clip was played for the ranger, he had no memory of hearing it in the moment. However, he reported experiencing nausea and vertigo around the same time the voice appeared in the recording. This temporal dissonance, events happening audibly but not consciously, is a recurring theme in Blackwater audio. Frequency analysis of these mimic voices reveals another oddity. They frequently contain infrasound components, low-frequency tones below the range of human hearing, known to cause anxiety, unease, and hallucinations in controlled studies. The use of infrasound in the forest is not incidental. Its presence is deliberate, often layered beneath the whispering or mimicry, as though intended to disrupt cognition and erode emotional stability. Listeners exposed to raw audio for extended periods often report symptoms: nosebleeds, dissociation, insomnia, or phantom hearing. One notable case involved an anonymous internet user who uploaded a 37-minute audio loop from an alleged Blackwater recording labeled Echo Lake Distortion. The file gained attention on deep web forums before being removed. During that time, several users reported disturbing effects. One claimed to see flickering shadows in their peripheral vision. Another said the audio triggered memories of places they'd never been. A third user, verified to be an audiophile with no history of mental illness, was hospitalized for acute psychosis after listening on loop overnight. Interestingly, efforts to clean or isolate these anomalies using digital software often result in corrupted or erased files. In multiple labs, high-fidelity attempts to strip background noise rendered the voice track silent. In other cases, software froze entirely, as if rejecting the signal. Audio engineers who worked on these files have described the experience as deeply unsettling, some refusing to continue analysis after initial exposure. The most famous audio mystery tied to Blackwater remains the Emily Carter 911 call. While much of the tape has been reviewed and publicized, the full recording, particularly the last 12 seconds, remains unreleased by authorities. Insiders who have heard the uncut version describe it as wrong in every way. The voice at the end, though still Emily's in form, speaks backwards, overlapping with another voice layered beneath, deeper, slower, non-human. No translator has successfully reversed or cleaned the audio without introducing more anomalies. Frequencies above 20,000 Hz appear, beyond human hearing, but registered by equipment. Some speculate these may be part of a deliberate masking system, encoded to disrupt decoding attempts. What is clear is this: the forest transmits. Whether it uses sound as a lure, a barrier, or a weapon remains unknown. But the voices, the hums, the distortions, none of them are random. They recur. They target. And they change depending on who's listening. The forest doesn't just consume people. It archives them, digitally, biologically, orally. It listens. It responds. And when it chooses, it speaks back. Within the tangled history of Blackwater Forest, one figure stands out above all others. The entity known only as the Smiling Man whispered about in Appalachian folklore, mentioned in fragmented reports, and linked, either symbolically or literally, to multiple disappearances, this presence has evolved from legend into something far more ominous. Its characteristics are contradictory. Its descriptions inconsistent. Yet the emotional core remains consistent across every report: unnatural calm, paralyzing fear, and a mouth that seems too wide for the face that holds it. The earliest recorded reference to a figure resembling the Smiling Man dates back to the 1800s, in a frontier-era diary belonging to a settler named Elias Wren. In his account, Wren wrote of a man with no camp, no gear, and no shoes, seen watching him from across a riverbank in silence. The man was described as wearing a crude grin, as if someone had painted it over a skull. Wren left the area the following day. A week later, his hunting partner vanished without a trace near the same river. Oral traditions among Appalachian mountain communities contain similar references. A common bedtime warning told to children in certain regions was, "Don't smile at the trees, or he'll smile back." Others include tales of voices in the woods calling out in laughter that doesn't change pitch. One variant of the tale describes a man-shaped thing that walks without sound, following people until they turn around, only to find a figure standing with a grin that never moves, never fades, and never blinks. In each version, the smile is wrong, not joyful, but stretched and forced, a fixed expression in defiance of normal human muscle control. Modern sightings have not decreased with time. In fact, they have become more detailed. Campers, hikers, and even forest workers have reported seeing a humanoid figure standing still at a distance, often just beyond the tree line, always facing them. It never approaches directly. It never speaks aloud. But some victims report hearing their own name in its presence, either in their head, through nearby radios, or even whispered from behind them when no one is there. The face never changes. Always the same smile, like it's trying to imitate human expression but doesn't understand it. Descriptions of its physical attributes vary. Some say it's tall and impossibly thin. Others report a bulkier, more shifting form. Some accounts claim it wears tattered clothes. Others say it is naked, but with skin so pale it almost glows in the dark. What unites all accounts is the face. Not just the smile, but the absence of normal facial behavior. No blinking. No frowning. No movement of the mouth. Just an eternal grin, stretched across a jaw that seems slightly unhinged. Like a mask permanently affixed, incapable of empathy. Psychologists analyzing testimonies have proposed mass hallucination, hysteria, or culturally reinforced pareidolia, seeing human shapes in the random arrangement of trees and shadows. But that fails to explain the physical consistency between independent reports across decades, counties, and technological eras. People separated by time, geography, and background continue to describe the same impossible facial expression. The effect is cross-cultural and non-media induced. No known film, character, or published myth matches it precisely. There is also growing speculation that the Smiling Man is not just a psychological or symbolic figure, but a kind of sentient embodiment of the forest's intelligence. If Blackwater itself is a living, reactive system, then the Smiling Man could be its avatar, a projected form designed to interface with human perception. Not a creature, but a function. Not biological, but mimetic, an idea that wears flesh when necessary. A warning sign embedded in human evolutionary fear responses. In several cases, individuals who saw the Smiling Man reported hearing the same phrase shortly before losing consciousness: "Don't run. He's already behind you." Whether this is a hallucination, A telepathic transmission, or a suggestion from a buried trauma remains unproven. But the emotional consistency is striking. Every witness describes feeling as though their limbs stopped responding. Some wet themselves involuntarily. Others claimed the air felt thicker, as if movement itself was being suppressed. This paralysis, sometimes psychosomatic, sometimes neurological, mirrors reported effects from infrasound, magnetic interference, and extreme emotional trauma. Moreover, photographic attempts to capture the figure have failed. Cameras glitch. Footage blurs at key moments. In one case, a trail cam appeared to record a human-shaped silhouette standing for several minutes, yet when the images were enhanced, the resolution degraded in only one part of the frame, the face. No eyes, no nose, just a static smoothed region where the smile would be. The effect resembled digital corruption, but localized to one facial zone. Some researchers have theorized that the smiling man could be related to the Jungian concept of the shadow archetype, the universal representation of our repressed fears and destructive instincts. Others take a more cryptozoological stance, believing it to be a forest-based entity, akin to Mothman or the Wendigo, designed not to attack physically but to destabilize the psyche. A fear predator. In either case, the smiling man has become more than legend. It has transcended storytelling and entered the space between documentation and myth, where enough people have seen it, feared it, and been marked by it, that its existence matters, whether material or not. It is not a rumor. It is a pattern. And as long as people enter Blackwater and come out broken, the smile will remain. Fixed. Watching. Waiting. While most who vanish in Blackwater Forest are never seen again, a small number re-emerge, found wandering miles from where they were last seen, often disoriented, physically altered, and mentally fragmented. These survivors form one of the most chilling aspects of the forest's mystery. Their minds carry partial memories. Their bodies display strange physiological changes. And most disturbing of all, their stories are eerily consistent, despite coming from people of different ages, backgrounds, and eras. Documented cases of Blackwater returnees are rare but heavily studied. In nearly all instances, the individual is found near the forest's perimeter, not by their own navigation, but as if placed there. They often appear in places previously searched thoroughly by trained teams. These appearances defy standard rescue patterns and have led some experts to believe that the forest itself chooses when to release them. Survivors are typically dehydrated, fatigued, and suffering from mild to severe hypothermia, even in temperate weather conditions. But these physical symptoms pale in comparison to the neurological effects. Most returnees report significant memory loss. The timeline between their disappearance and recovery is usually blank, interrupted by flashes that make little coherent sense, images of unnatural light, whispers in impossible directions, or the sensation of being watched from multiple angles at once. Many suffer from what clinicians term temporal disjunction, a state where the individual cannot correctly perceive how much time has passed. One survivor believed he had been missing for hours. It had been 3 weeks. Another thought she'd been gone for years, only to discover it had been 2 days. More chilling are the shared elements in their fragmented recollections. The most common themes include the sound of someone walking exactly 1 step behind them, no matter how fast they moved. A pervasive smell of iron or burnt ozone. Whispers in familiar voices, often mimicking loved ones. The sight of tall, thin shadows, standing perfectly still at impossible angles, sometimes along vertical surfaces. The unshakable belief that they were being studied by something without a face. Some survivors also display behavioral anomalies after recovery. A documented percentage of them begin sleepwalking, often waking up outside their homes with no memory of leaving. Others compulsively draw spirals, trees with faces, or unfamiliar symbols with uncanny precision. A few develop light sensitivity, claiming the sun now feels too artificial. One former hiker, upon recovery, permanently lost the ability to read written language, despite no physical damage to the brain. MRI scans of some survivors have revealed temporary lesions in the hippocampus and occipital lobes, areas of the brain responsible for memory and visual processing. These abnormalities fade over weeks, but leave behind long-term psychological residue, derealization, paranoia, and in extreme cases, Capgras delusion, the belief that family members have been replaced by exact duplicates. Perhaps most alarming is the phenomenon known among researchers as resonant return. This term describes the compulsion survivors develop to go back to the forest. It begins subtly, with dreams, curiosity, or irrational nostalgia, and escalates into obsession. One subject, after being released from psychiatric care, was found attempting to re-enter Blackwater with no gear or supplies. He was stopped at the edge of the woods, eyes wide, whispering, "It knows I left. It wants to finish." Others have tried to map their dreams, convinced the forest has embedded navigational markers in their subconscious. Family members of survivors often report disturbing changes as well. In multiple cases, loved ones claim the returnee is not the same, not just in mood or behavior, but in micro-expressions and vocal cadence. Some even believe the person who returned isn't the same one who left. DNA testing has been inconclusive. In 2 documented instances, birthmarks were found missing, and minor anatomical features, ear shape, tooth placement, fingerprint patterns, were subtly but unmistakably altered. The psychological cost extends beyond the individual. Families fracture. Relationships dissolve. A sense of unease lingers around those who return, as if they carry something with them that can't be named. In one case, a survivor's entire household began reporting phenomena after his return: cold spots, electronics malfunctioning, and the sound of laughter coming from vents. After 3 months, the family moved across the country. They left no forwarding address. Attempts to interview survivors often end abruptly. Many refuse to speak. Some begin, then stop mid-sentence, appearing confused or afraid. Several recordings capture subjects trailing off and staring into space, pupils dilated, sweat forming on their foreheads, hands trembling. When asked what they saw, they tend to respond with abstract phrases. The forest thinks in spirals. It showed me its skin. I left. But not all of me. There's something under the roots. Of all phenomena associated with Blackwater, the survivors represent the clearest proof that something exists beyond natural explanation. They are living echoes of a place that consumes reality and rearranges it. They are not just witnesses. They are altered variables in a system that refuses to be mapped. Attempting to map Blackwater Forest is a task marked not only by futility but by danger. Over the years, multiple expeditions, government efforts, and independent researchers have tried to chart its terrain, topographically, geologically, and even metaphysically. None have succeeded. Not fully. The forest refuses to remain still. Paths disappear. Rivers shift course. Elevation changes between visits. Trails spiral in on themselves. And worse, maps made within the forest often cease to match any known geographical data once they leave it. In 1973, the U.S. Geological Survey deployed a team to formally chart the forest's western corridor. Using theodolites, compasses, and early GPS prototypes, they expected a routine mapping operation. What they returned with was a topographic profile riddled with impossible inconsistencies. Areas where elevation dropped by hundreds of feet in meters of horizontal distance, cliff faces marked in zones that aerial photography confirmed were flat, and forest density readings that changed with every pass. The final report was quietly shelved. Internal memos described the terrain as fluid, not fixed. Even satellite imaging has failed to capture stable views of the area. Weather patterns often obscure the forest in haze or cloud cover. When visibility is clear, images still display irregularities, unnatural shadow formations, light refraction patterns inconsistent with sun angles, and, on rare occasions, shapes that resemble structures or symbols in the canopy, which vanish upon closer analysis. AI-assisted image reviews mark these patterns as anomalies, but cannot classify them. One of the most disconcerting elements of the forest's resistance to mapping lies in its relationship with directionality. Compasses often spin or point toward magnetic north only to veer without warning. GPS units freeze, reboot, or show shifting coordinates even when stationary. In one study, 3 different models of GPS units placed at the same location within the forest logged 3 separate positions, each differing by hundreds of meters. When the same devices were tested in urban environments the following day, they performed normally. A more subtle form of spatial manipulation appears in the form of looping. Hikers report walking for hours in one direction, only to arrive at their starting point without ever turning around. Some describe returning to marked trees they had passed hours before, even though they followed new trails. These loops appear to trap individuals without obvious boundaries. They are not defined by landmarks or terrain, but by an unseen spatial barrier that folds reality back onto itself. In certain reports, hikers walked in straight lines using compasses and still returned to the origin point. Even more disturbing are cases of non-Euclidean anomalies, zones where space inside the forest appears to contain more volume than its physical perimeter allows. A field researcher in 2008 documented a glade that, when measured by laser rangefinder, had a diameter of 23 meters. But when he attempted to cross it, the traversal time, logged by pedometer and audio log, took nearly 9 minutes of steady walking. Repeated attempts yielded inconsistent time frames, and when aerial coordinates were overlaid, the glade could not be located at all. There are also reports of maps created inside Blackwater that change once removed. Hand-drawn sketches that showed rivers and hills become blank. Trails disappear from the page. In some extreme cases, ink itself fades or rearranges, leaving pages either empty or covered in abstract spirals and symbols. Digital tablets used for cartography have returned with corrupted files, GPS tracks that curve in mathematically impossible patterns, and image data containing visual glitches, especially in the blue and red light channels. The devices often cannot be reformatted afterward. One former cartographer reported that while inside the forest, he could visualize the landscape perfectly, almost as if the trees and ridgelines were speaking to his sense of direction directly. He filled 2 sketchbooks with detailed maps. But once he exited, none of the drawings made sense. Scale was distorted, rivers led uphill, and trails intersected in nonlinear grids. His only comment in the margin of the last page was, "It made sense in there. It doesn't out here." These spatial inconsistencies suggest that Blackwater does not follow traditional geography. Instead, it appears to function on a shifting spatial logic, one influenced by presence, intent, or perhaps even consciousness. Those who enter may not just be walking through forest, but through mutable zones of reality that respond to observation itself. If space is defined by relational experience, where one is in relation to where one has been, then Blackwater appears to sever that continuity. Each step is no guarantee of distance traveled. Each landmark is no promise of repetition. There are whispers in esoteric communities that the forest sits atop a topological void, a place where the structure of spacetime is thin or torn. Fringe theories suggest Blackwater overlays a dormant energy node, a site of geomagnetic convergence, or an ancient structure buried beneath centuries of organic growth. Whatever the truth, what's certain is this: the more one tries to map it, the more it resists. Like an organism that does not want to be known, or a maze that changes the moment you understand it. No matter how many compasses are calibrated, how many trails are marked, or how many satellites are aimed overhead, the forest shifts. Always just enough to ensure no 2 maps are ever the same. No chart is reliable. No guide can be trusted. And perhaps that's the point. It cannot be mapped, because it does not want to be found. Among the most baffling and least understood phenomena associated with Blackwater Forest is the repeated documentation of time behaving abnormally. These distortions, often referred to by researchers as chronal anomalies, range from minutes lost during simple hikes to entire days vanishing from a person's memory or watch logs. Unlike standard disorientation or exhaustion-induced confusion, these incidents occur across individuals of sound mind, often recorded by multiple synchronized devices and corroborated by third-party observers. One of the earliest known references to time anomalies in Blackwater comes from a 1912 logging expedition. Several workers reported setting out at sunrise and returning before noon, only to find the sky black and their campfires long extinguished. Their wristwatches, then mechanical and wind-based, indicated they had been gone for 8 minutes. A foreman's journal from the time notes, "We must have passed into another hour. Or perhaps another hour passed through us." Modern examples are far more unsettling. Hikers with digital watches, smart devices, and GPS trackers have returned with logs showing gaps. Sudden absences of time where no movement or data was recorded, even though they continued walking, speaking, or filming. These blackouts are not always perceived by the individual in real time. Often, they become aware of missing time only when comparing timestamps on photographs or recorded audio. In one well-documented case from 2015, a pair of wildlife photographers entered Blackwater at 7:15 a.m., planning a short sunrise shoot near the eastern ridgeline. They re-emerged 5 hours later, pale and disoriented, claiming to have been inside the forest for less than an hour. Their phones showed battery levels consistent with 5 hours of use, and their vehicle's dashcam confirmed they had parked at the time they believed. However, their DSLR cameras, which had been used during their outing, had timestamps from only the first 43 minutes, with nothing logged afterward. One photo showed a partially obscured tree with a double shadow, despite the sun being directly overhead. In another instance, a park volunteer on night patrol radioed his supervisor at 11:02 p.m. He gave his location and status, confirming he was near mile marker 9. At 11:04 p.m., less than 2 minutes later, he was found unconscious near the ranger station, 8 miles away. GPS logs showed no movement. The radio signal had not traveled the distance between the 2 points. His own body cam footage ceased recording at the moment he reported his location. When he woke, he believed he had simply tripped on a route. He refused to believe that more than an hour had passed and required medical sedation due to panic and disorientation. Researchers have identified a pattern to the temporal disruptions. They seem more likely to occur in the following conditions: during full moons or solstices, near previously documented vanishing points, when devices begin to fail or produce static interference, in areas with low animal activity or unexplained silence. The silence, in particular, is noteworthy. In zones where time slips are most frequent, environmental sound often ceases entirely. Not even insects make noise. It's as if sound, and with it, the progression of moments, is being suspended. Some hypothesize that time is not merely moving differently in Blackwater, but maybe folding, skipping, or briefly collapsing entirely. Corroborating this are reports from multiple individuals who've claimed to see others frozen in place, motionless, eyes wide, as if paused mid-action, only for the moment to pass a second later with no memory from the person in question. Others have described the opposite: companions who appear to move or speak several seconds ahead of what should be possible, seeming to predict the future or echo events before they occur. In group settings, these incidents are especially disorienting, as different members often remember conversations happening at different times, or not at all. Attempts to record or measure the phenomenon directly have proven difficult. Analog watches perform slightly better than digital ones, but still often drift by several seconds per hour. High-speed video footage taken in affected areas sometimes reveals frames where environmental motion skips entirely. Wind stops mid-rustle, birds vanish from one frame to the next. Some researchers believe the forest hosts a kind of temporal gradient, where the flow of time slows or accelerates depending on unknown variables, possibly linked to the forest structure, density, or atmospheric pressure changes. More speculative theories suggest that Blackwater does not exist in a single temporal framework. Rather, it may be an intersection point between multiple timelines, or a dimensional overlap where time functions as a membrane rather than a straight line. Individuals caught in the anomaly are not simply losing time. They may be stepping into a space where time is optional or incomplete. Memories warp, duration fractures, and continuity is not guaranteed. This could explain why certain victims are never found, not because they died, but because they are no longer in sync with our shared progression of time. Some may still be walking through the forest, unaware that weeks or years have passed outside. Others might return long after they left, unaged or unaware of their absence. There is no way to predict when a time anomaly will occur. It does not announce itself. It leaves no visible scar on the land. It only becomes evident when it's too late, when hours vanish like mist, and the sun sets too soon. Blackwater does not trap people with walls or chains. It uses something more subtle. It takes time itself, and gives nothing back. The disappearances in Blackwater Forest are not random. Though long assumed to be scattered, disconnected events, deeper analysis reveals a chilling pattern, one that suggests an underlying structure to who vanishes, when, and possibly even why. These cases span over a century, and while local authorities have historically labeled them as isolated incidents or tragic accidents, comparative study across generations exposes repeating variables that challenge coincidence. The victims vary in age, gender, race, and background, but within that diversity lies a strange set of commonalities. First, most of the missing share a certain psychological profile: curiosity bordering on compulsion, a documented history of vivid dreams, or a sensitivity to sound. Many were described by family as listeners, people who were unusually perceptive, easily startled by whispers, or prone to hearing things others didn't. Several were musicians, sound engineers, or linguists. In a surprising number of cases, individuals had no intention of entering the forest alone, yet were found to have done exactly that, either by choice or by an unknown compulsion. Second, their last known locations often fall within what field researchers have begun calling the vanishing line, a curving band of forest that begins near the eastern ridges and coils inward through the densest part of Blackwater. This band seems to shift slightly over the years, but remains consistent in shape, a spiral that tightens toward a central area that no modern mapping effort has successfully penetrated. The few who disappeared outside this line were usually pursuing something or someone who crossed it first. Interestingly, many of the victims left behind markers before disappearing. Items like shoes, scarves, or handwritten notes were placed in ways that seemed intentional. In one case, a missing woman's journal was found open to a page where she had drawn a tree repeatedly, with the phrase, "It's listening now," written over and over again between the branches. In another, a young man's tent was discovered zipped from the inside, his boots arranged neatly at the opening, his flashlight left on, pointed toward a patch of undisturbed moss. It was as if he had planned to return shortly, and never did. Digital footprints are also often erased or corrupted. Phones belonging to the missing frequently go dark moments before their disappearance, even in areas with strong signal. Call logs end mid-connection, GPS apps freeze or crash, and voice memos recorded within the forest either fail to save or are blank when recovered. The few recovered recordings often include auditory distortions or background murmuring not present at the time of recording, leading to speculation that some interference, either electromagnetic or preternatural, is actively preventing real-time documentation. Another repeating factor involves liminality, a psychological state or physical space characterized by transition, threshold, or in-betweenness. Many of those who vanished were last seen near symbolic boundaries, bridges, tree arches, stone circles, or paths dividing shadow from light. These locations, known in folklore as thin places, are believed to mark the edges of where the veil between worlds wears down. In Blackwater, these places are never marked on official maps. Locals know of them, but seldom speak their names. One such site, nicknamed the Echo Fork, is where a disproportionate number of vanishings begin, and where screams have been reported with no trace of any source. The forest seems to target individuals during moments of emotional vulnerability or transition. Several victims had recently experienced trauma, loss, heartbreak, or psychological breakdowns. Some were reportedly acting strangely in the days before entering the woods, forgetting faces, losing time, or claiming they felt watched in their dreams. It is as if the forest doesn't merely lure victims, it selects them. Attempts to model the disappearances using algorithms or geographic profiling have yielded disturbing symmetry. Clusters form pentagonal or spiral patterns, geometries too precise to be accidental. In one unpublished study, overlaying the disappearances with geomagnetic anomalies produced a near-perfect match. This suggests that the forest's behavior may be tied to environmental or subterranean conditions, though that fails to explain how such anomalies correlate so precisely with human psychology and behavior. Most unsettling of all is the silence around these cases. Many family members claim they were discouraged by local officials from pursuing deeper investigations. Files have reportedly gone missing from police archives. Names have been redacted without explanation. In one instance, a grieving sister stated that she was warned not to make the forest louder than it already is. The phrase was nonsensical, unless taken as a reference to the forest's auditory phenomena, or a metaphorical suggestion that Blackwater responds to attention. Some families who press too hard experience strange events themselves, flickering lights, ringing phones with no caller, or hearing the lost one's voice echoing faintly in their home. Whether these are trauma-induced hallucinations or something more malicious is still debated. What is undeniable is the aura of dread and finality that surrounds each loss. They are not merely missing. They are taken, removed from the record of time, from the possibility of closure. Blackwater does not take everyone, but those it chooses vanish without violence, without trace, without reason, and always along the same invisible curve, just beyond the line where maps end and stories begin. While many strange aspects of Blackwater Forest have been documented over the decades, disappearances, time loss, visual distortions, none are as universally reported as the sound. Not the natural ambience of a forested region, but the presence of an ever-changing layer of unnatural audio phenomena, whispered names, rhythmic humming, and tonal shifts in the air that seem to trigger deep psychological responses. These sounds are not always heard with the ears. Some are felt in the bones, or recognized as an afterimage in the mind. This has led to an emerging body of theory suggesting that Blackwater operates through acoustic manipulation, using sound to alter perception, influence behavior, and even induce physiological changes. Infrasound, or low-frequency sound below the range of human hearing, is the most widely accepted scientific basis for some of the forest's effects. Frequencies below 20 Hz can cause anxiety, unease, nausea, and even hallucinations in controlled laboratory settings. In Blackwater, handheld sound meters have regularly detected infrasonic levels fluctuating in narrow bands between 17 and 19 Hz, especially in areas where disappearances have occurred. These fluctuations do not follow environmental patterns like wind or seismic activity. Instead, they appear localized, as if being generated by specific points within the forest. Multiple researchers have reported sudden onset dizziness, pressure in the skull, or involuntary emotional responses, such as panic or euphoria, when standing in certain locations. The effects dissipate when the individual exits the immediate area. This behavior resembles known interactions between infrasound and the human nervous system, but with one key difference: variability. The emotional impact is not consistent. Some individuals feel dread, others a sense of welcome or awe. This suggests that the sound is not passive but reactive, possibly tuned to individual neural signatures. There is also the phenomenon of phantom resonance, a term coined by acoustic physicist Dr. Mara Chen, who conducted an unauthorized study in Blackwater in 2016. Chen brought with her a portable anechoic chamber, a soundproof tent designed to block all external audio. She reported hearing tones inside the chamber that were not present outside it. Her instruments detected harmonic oscillations between 432 and 440 Hz, a range closely associated with the human auditory comfort zone. Yet no external sound source was present, and the tent should have been completely silent. Her conclusion was that the forest emits self-generating harmonic interference that penetrates even soundproofed environments. She later described it as a melody that isn't sung, only suggested. One of the most disturbing features of Blackwater's acoustic profile is its apparent use of mimicry. Witnesses frequently describe hearing familiar voices, parents, children, partners, calling from just beyond sight. These voices are often contextually accurate, using inside phrases or private names known only to the intended listener. When followed, they lead deeper into the forest. The people who heed these voices are rarely seen again. What creates these vocalizations is unknown, but their specificity indicates either an intelligent source or an unprecedented capacity for auditory data acquisition and replication. Attempts to record these phenomena often result in files riddled with distortion, skips, or sudden audio spikes resembling static layered with speech. When isolated and cleaned, many of these clips reveal whispered phrases buried under the surface, often incomprehensible, but sometimes in multiple languages or dialects. One recovered file contained repeated utterances of the word "stay" in 9 different linguistic forms, layered beneath a child's laughter and wind noise. Audio analysts were unable to explain how such a composite could exist without deliberate editing. There is also evidence that Blackwater's soundscape may interfere with the brain's internal timing mechanisms. Subjects exposed to long-duration ambient recordings from the forest report altered time perception, dreaming during waking states, or experiencing memories that do not belong to them. Some speculate that sound within Blackwater serves not just to disorient, but to rewrite experience, embedding itself into memory to reshape how individuals understand past and present. A growing fringe theory suggests the forest may be using sound as a language, not one humans can decode easily, but one that communicates through resonance, intuition, and subconscious suggestion. This resonant language would bypass rational processing, embedding itself into the sensory architecture of perception. People wouldn't hear messages in words, but feel them in their nervous system, like tuning forks resonating at specific frequencies. A subtle form of instruction that could guide behavior, erase resistance, or create the illusion of voluntary choice. In some cases, returning visitors begin to hear the sounds of the forest even in urban environments: subway tunnels, power line hums, or wind through skyscrapers. These auditory echoes, often accompanied by insomnia or paranoia, suggest a form of imprinting. The forest's sound, once internalized, may not fully leave. It may continue to interact with the subject across distance and time, like an infection with no physical form. What remains clear is that Blackwater's acoustic signature is more than environmental. It is a function. It carries intention. It has evolved, adapted, and learned to shape human behavior through one of the most fundamental senses. Not through brute force, not through visible presence, through the whisper, through vibration, through sound engineered to bypass awareness and settle beneath the skin. It doesn't need to speak to be heard. It only needs you to listen, just once. For a place so consistently tied to unexplained disappearances and phenomena, Blackwater Forest has received remarkably little mainstream attention. It does not appear on most lists of national paranormal hotspots. There are no prominent documentaries, no viral videos, and very few surviving official investigations. This absence is not due to a lack of evidence or eyewitnesses. Rather, it seems to stem from a deliberate and methodical effort to suppress awareness of the forest and its mysteries. Over the past 50 years, researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators who have attempted to expose the truth about Blackwater have encountered sudden resistance, from missing files and shuttered databases to inexplicably revoked permits and legal threats. In numerous cases, archived case materials once available to the public were quietly removed from county and state databases, often without formal notice. FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, requests related to the forest or any surrounding missing persons cases are frequently delayed or returned with large, unexplained redactions. Several local law enforcement agencies refuse to discuss Blackwater disappearances beyond scripted statements citing natural hazards, weather conditions, or misadventure. Yet internal memos leaked by former officers reveal contradictions. One sheriff's deputy, in a redacted email from 2004, wrote, "Stop adding it to the reports. We've already been told not to recognize clusters. The word pattern isn't allowed anymore." Another document, part of a now-deleted State Patrol incident log, warned officers not to enter a specific zone within the forest under any circumstances, citing unconfirmed atmospheric interference. The question of who is enforcing this suppression remains unanswered. While no formal organization has claimed authority over the forest, multiple incidents suggest the presence of an unacknowledged force tasked with keeping the truth buried. Hikers have reported seeing unmarked vehicles on forest access roads. Amateur drone operators have had their signals jammed and equipment confiscated. Several wildlife cameras set up near known disappearance sites were stolen or destroyed within days, often without any sign of forced entry or human disturbance. A few whistleblowers have come forward, though most have either disappeared themselves or retracted their statements under unclear circumstances. One former forestry technician, who anonymously published a series of field notes online, claimed the U.S. Forest Service had designated parts of Blackwater as ecological dead zones, not because of biodiversity loss, but to avoid the need for public maintenance or patrols. He described witnessing armed men removing bodies from the forest without reporting them to local authorities. His blog was taken offline days after gaining national attention, and no trace of the author has been found since. Suppression extends beyond official channels. Media coverage of Blackwater is sporadic and inconsistent. Newspapers that once covered the area's tragedies have stopped reporting them entirely. One local news station aired a brief exposé in 1998 on the growing number of unsolved disappearances, only to issue a full retraction a week later, claiming journalistic overreach. Their reporter quit shortly after, citing irreconcilable editorial interference. His follow-up book, detailing his research into the Smiling Man mythos and missing persons clusters, was never published. The draft manuscript leaked years later contained disturbing sections on psychological manipulation and possible experimentation. Digital forums and online communities dedicated to discussing the forest often experience data loss. Entire threads vanish. Accounts are banned for violating vague content guidelines. Reddit posts about Blackwater frequently get auto-moderated with no explanation. Those that survive often receive bizarre replies, non-sequiturs, copy-pasted scripture, or cryptic warnings that seem designed to derail the conversation. Some users speculate that bots or paid disinformation agents actively monitor and obfuscate discussion around the topic. Even satellite imaging platforms seem affected. Certain regions of the forest display pixelated blur zones or outdated imagery, even when surrounding areas are crisp and recent. When asked, satellite providers cite data corruption or licensing issues. But these explanations do not hold up under scrutiny. Researchers who compared Google Earth and archival Landsat data noted subtle distortions within the canopy structure, symmetries too regular to be natural, yet never acknowledged in official terrain assessments. The phenomenon of institutional forgetting, a psychological and procedural tactic in which organizations intentionally erase records, deny history, and overwrite inconvenient truths, may be at play. It is not that people are unaware of Blackwater. It is that the systems built to observe and respond to such phenomena have been intentionally disabled. This is not ignorance. It is omission with purpose. Why such effort would be made to conceal the truth remains speculative. Some suggest the forest is home to a classified experiment, perhaps an acoustic weapon testbed, electromagnetic anomaly, or psychological manipulation field. Others believe the forest itself is sentient, and that certain organizations know it and fear it. A more disturbing theory posits that something within Blackwater is useful to someone in power, whether as a resource, a boundary zone, or even a prison for something that must not be released. What unites all of these theories is the same core belief. Blackwater Forest is not just strange, it is protected. Not by rangers or wildlife conservationists, but by silence. By bureaucracy. By absence. The most dangerous secrets are not hidden in vaults or encrypted behind firewalls. They are erased from memory, buried in paperwork, and surrounded by just enough fear and confusion to keep people away. And for decades, it's worked. Until now. Across multiple independent investigations, one visual motif recurs throughout the history of Blackwater Forest: the spiral. It appears carved into trees, drawn in mud, etched into glass by fingernails, and even found embedded in the ground as subtle topographical patterns, coils, loops, or nautilus shapes, usually with an inward trajectory. The spiral is not simply a decorative flourish. It surfaces in disappearance sites, survivor drawings, hallucination reports, and in recovered artifacts going back over 100 years. Its consistency across decades, regions of the forest, and unrelated witnesses suggests something more than coincidence. It may be the closest thing Blackwater has to a language. In folklore, the spiral is often associated with portals, gateways, or liminal zones, places of transition between states of being. It also symbolizes cycles, recursion, and infinity. In the context of Blackwater, the spiral seems to indicate movement not through space, but through perception. Survivors often describe feeling drawn inward, as though they were walking toward a center that was both a location and a state of mind. Some compare the sensation to a gravitational pull, one that doesn't tug at the body, but the mind. Recovered sketches and journals of missing persons frequently contain spirals. These are rarely perfect, often hand-drawn with frantic energy or obsessive precision. In a number of instances, the spiral is accompanied by cryptic notations, single words like echo, it turns, or not out but through. In one disturbing case from 1989, a hiker who went missing for 4 days and returned uninjured was found with dozens of spirals scratched into the underside of his tent, arranged in rows like a script. He had no memory of drawing them and could not explain why his fingers were raw and bleeding. The spiral's presence is not limited to two-dimensional surfaces. Several reported clearing circles within Blackwater have natural formations, trees, stones, even fungal growths, that follow an unnatural spiral configuration. Aerial photographs show certain tree clusters forming elliptical curves when viewed from above, invisible to those on the ground. Some believe these formations are natural responses to an unseen field, while others suggest deliberate arrangement, by something with an awareness of symbol and meaning. More unsettling is the theory that the spiral acts as a psychological trigger. Exposure to spiral imagery within the forest may induce subtle cognitive effects, including déjà vu, directional confusion, and temporal dissociation. This may explain why victims repeatedly walk in circles, or why survivors struggle to differentiate past from present. A few psychologists have proposed that the spiral functions as a mnemonic virus, a visual stimulus that embeds itself in short-term memory and distorts recall sequences. In simple terms, the longer one focuses on the spiral, the more unstable their sense of time and direction becomes. Audio recordings taken near spiral formations also exhibit anomalies. Frequency analysis reveals consistent waveforms at harmonic intervals, subtle tones that rise in pitch the longer the recording continues, forming a mirrored auditory spiral. This audio feature is accompanied by distortion artifacts, static bursts, reversed phrases, and layered whispers. Experts in psychoacoustics have noted that these sounds seem to mimic theta brainwave frequencies, typically associated with trance states or hypnagogic hallucinations. This suggests the forest may be using both visual and auditory spirals to alter consciousness directly. Spirals are also linked to cases of shared delusion, or, more accurately, synchronized perception. In several group disappearances, recovered notebooks or digital notes from multiple victims contain identical spiral sketches, drawn days apart without knowledge of each other's work. In one particularly eerie case, 3 amateur explorers each drew the same spiral, starting with the same number of rings and direction of rotation, even though they were separated for most of their time in the forest. When questioned later, each insisted the image came to them in a dream, or like something whispered behind the eyes. The presence of the spiral in historical artifacts found near the forest cannot be ignored either. Cave etchings in the nearby hills, carbon dated to pre-colonial times, include spiral carvings positioned at intervals along stone walls, oriented in patterns that align with known Blackwater ley lines. Tribal oral traditions speak of paths that fold and turns that lead to silence, accompanied by symbolic maps that resemble fractal spirals. These references were often interpreted metaphorically, until modern mapping of disappearance sites confirmed the repeating, inward-turning pattern of vanishings over the last century. There is also the emerging hypothesis that the spiral is not simply a symbol but a structure, a kind of blueprint or resonance map. According to this theory, Blackwater operates like a living organism or computational system. The spiral represents the processing route, how the forest draws in data, consciousness, sound, time, and rearranges it according to rules that do not follow human logic. Each disappearance, each distortion, is not random. It is a step along the spiral. Not a maze, but a coil. Not an escape, but a return. Why the spiral? Perhaps because it has no beginning or end. It offers no fixed point of reference. It guides the eye inward, into depth, into collapse. And in Blackwater, where maps fail and sound deceives, the spiral is the only compass, one that points not outward, but ever deeper into the unknown. What begins as a pattern becomes a pathway. What seems like art becomes architecture. What appears symbolic may, in truth, be a doorway. Always turning. Always narrowing. Always listening. The rare individuals who emerge from Blackwater Forest after going missing return altered. These survivors, often found weeks or even months later, display physical health inconsistent with their time away. No significant weight loss, injuries healed beyond expectation, and, in some cases, improved vision or immunity. But what is more unsettling is the mental transformation. These individuals come back speaking in fragmented thoughts, obsessively sketching symbols, or exhibiting behaviors entirely out of character. Most have no coherent memory of the period they were gone. Those who do remember anything speak in cryptic terms, hinting at experiences that defy linear time, language, or comprehension. Clinical interviews with survivors reveal recurring themes. The most frequent is the overwhelming presence of sound, described not as noise, but as awareness. Survivors claim the forest knew they were there, and that it communicated not in words, but in impressions, emotions projected directly into their thoughts. One survivor described it as standing inside a voice that wasn't speaking. Another likened it to the sensation of being read like a page. Despite vast differences in education, background, and beliefs, many survivors use similar metaphors when describing their experience. They speak of being turned inside out, folded, or rewound. One former camper, lost for 11 days, repeatedly drew the same image, a human face with its eyes on the inside of the skull, staring out through the back of the head. He could not explain its meaning, only that it was how it sees. Cognitive evaluations show mild to severe impairment in temporal sequencing, with some subjects displaying confusion about current dates, their age, or the passage of time since their return. One woman, gone for 3 weeks, insisted it had only been 3 hours. Her smartwatch, oddly, supported her claim. The battery percentage and timestamps aligned with a 3-hour window, even though she had been reported missing and searched for by dozens of rescue teams. Her hair and nails had not grown in that time. But when she spoke, she described seeing seasons change around her. Memory gaps among the returned follow no consistent pattern. Some remember the moment they entered the forest clearly, only for everything afterward to blur into images. Trees that blink, shadows that follow sound, and objects that rearrange themselves when not observed. Others recall vivid, structured sequences that sound more like dreams than reality. Staircases in the dirt leading nowhere, rooms carved into tree trunks that contain mirrors, or trails of light that mimic voices from childhood. One consistent phenomenon is an absence of language. Survivors often lose the ability to name things in the days immediately after their return. A tent becomes the sleep cloth, a flashlight becomes the small sun. This form of lexical erosion typically resolves within a week, but for some, it never fully returns. Language is replaced with gestures, tones, or repeated humming, an involuntary rhythm that closely matches some of the low-frequency audio recorded in the forest. Linguists studying these cases have speculated that whatever cognitive forces operate within Blackwater may directly interfere with the brain's linguistic centers, either suppressing speech or replacing it with an alternative symbolic system. Survivors also tend to display unusual aversions, specific phobias that emerge without prior psychological cause. Common examples include fear of fog, aversion to mirrors, or anxiety triggered by spiral patterns. Some are unable to sleep unless surrounded by constant ambient noise, such as fans or white noise generators. Silence, they claim, feels too loud. This hypersensitivity to environmental sound further supports theories that the forest alters internal perception in lasting ways. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery is the phenomenon of post-return echoes. Family members of the returned sometimes report hearing their loved one's voice in rooms where they are not present, or seeing them move slightly differently, just enough to seem unfamiliar. In some extreme cases, individuals have claimed that the person who returned is not the same as the one who left. This belief is reinforced by subtle inconsistencies: a lifelong vegetarian who begins eating meat without explanation, or a childhood stutter that vanishes completely. Facial recognition AI has flagged returned individuals with 92 to 97% accuracy, slightly below the threshold for exact identity matches. While such discrepancies can be dismissed as technical anomalies, the fact that multiple cases show similar scores raises questions about whether something deeper has changed. There are whispers of false returns, individuals who came back but had no official record of having gone missing. Their families never reported them gone, but they carry stories identical to documented disappearances. In one case, a man arrived at a ranger station claiming he'd been missing for 2 days, describing a search party that had never occurred. No one had reported him lost. His name did not appear in any system. Yet he knew of landmarks that were never made public, and he correctly described the contents of a sealed logbook kept by staff. His file has since been classified by an unnamed agency, and follow-up interviews were prohibited. Whether these survivors were altered, replaced, or somehow broken during their time in Blackwater remains a subject of heated debate. What is clear is that no one returns unchanged. The forest does not simply take. It reshapes. It overwrites. And when it gives someone back, it is not always out of mercy. In the shadows of official silence, an underground body of documentation has steadily grown, unofficial, often anonymous, and dismissed by authorities as hoaxes or speculative fiction. Yet within this scattered and fragmented archive lies something remarkable, a recurring object referred to in whispered online forums and suppressed private logs as the Blackwater Codex. Not a single item, but rather a collection of strange, handwritten journals, sketches, sound transcriptions, and carved objects, all linked by origin, symbol, and subject, each allegedly discovered near or within the boundaries of Blackwater Forest. References to a codex began to surface as early as the 1940s, when a series of spiral-bound notebooks were found beneath the floorboards of an abandoned ranger outpost. These notebooks contained crude hand-drawn maps of the forest, complete with glyphs and markings that did not match any known language. Several pages describe the forest as a place that breathes in thoughts and exhales memory. The handwriting varied from page to page, suggesting multiple authors, some childlike, others precise and clinical. The final pages of each notebook were blacked out, either by ink or burned away. Years later, in the 1970s, a private researcher known only by the pseudonym Langford released portions of what he called the second fragment, a coded manuscript written in phonetic symbols that, when translated phonetically into English, formed broken sentences describing the mouth under the hill and songs no throat can sing. Langford vanished shortly after posting an audio recording online of what he claimed was a playback of those songs. The clip lasted 17 seconds and was removed from every hosting platform within 24 hours. Listeners who downloaded it early described it as the sound of something alive being erased. By the early 2000s, fragments of the codex began appearing in physical form again. One art student visiting the area on a photography retreat returned with a flat, oval-shaped stone that had been carefully etched with both spirals and an unfamiliar pattern resembling teeth. Upon closer inspection, the grooves were so fine they registered audio feedback when passed beneath a phonograph needle. The resulting playback was a low, rhythmic thumping interspersed with what sounded like reversed whispers. Experts dismissed it as pareidolia, an auditory illusion, but the student later claimed the pattern was not carved when she found it. More troubling are the organic components. A reclusive folklorist in Tennessee claims to possess what he believes is a preserved piece of forest skin, a patch of bark with underlying fibrous tissue resembling both tree and animal anatomy. Embedded within it are minute symbols visible only under infrared light, geometric clusters echoing the spiral. He refers to it as bioglyphic material, implying a written language that exists within both nature and flesh. When scanned, the bark emitted a consistent 2.3 Hz pulse, well within the infrasound range. Artifacts thought to be part of the codex share certain anomalies. They resist standard forms of dating. Carbon testing produces inconsistent results. Electronic scans and photographs often fail, resulting in corrupted files or blank outputs. Prolonged physical contact induces vivid dreams in which the artifact speaks or pulses. Some items disappear entirely when removed from forest proximity, as though geographically anchored. There is no single repository or curator of these items. Pieces surface, vanish, or are buried again, some say deliberately. Rumors persist of a sealed chamber beneath the original ranger station, containing more fragments of the codex sealed away during the 1983 Federal Quiet Zone Order. No record of such an order exists, but communication blackouts in the region were documented during that time. In private circles, there is growing belief that the codex is not a warning system, but an invitation. That the forest has been trying to communicate for centuries, and those who vanish are not simply lost, but listening. The codex, in this interpretation, is a transmission medium, a puzzle built from symbols, sound, and memory, intended for minds altered enough to interpret it. The symbols, when plotted geometrically, seem to form a recursive shape, a spiral within a spiral, fractal layers moving inward. Mathematicians who've analyzed high-resolution tracings have noted similarities to natural patterns found in DNA, neural networks, and even weather systems. One unsettling theory posits that the codex represents not a map or message, but a structure, a cognitive space that can only be accessed when thought aligns with the forest's rhythm. What happens if the codex is completed, or understood, remains unknown. Some theorize it opens a doorway, a psychological or even physical threshold into another state of reality, perhaps the one Blackwater exists to guard. Others fear it may awaken something slumbering within the land, a force encoded into the spiral, waiting for a mind that finally reads it right. Skeptics argue that the codex is a myth, a psychological manifestation created by those seeking pattern in chaos. But if that were the case, it would be one of the most consistent delusions in modern folklore, emerging independently across time, cultures, and consciousness. The codex may be incomplete. It may be alive. It may be reading us even now. And still, more pieces turn up, buried in roots, whispered into tapes, scratched into windows during stormy nights. Blackwater is writing. The forest is recording. We just haven't figured out the language yet. Theories surrounding the anomalies of Blackwater Forest have ranged from geological oddities and cryptid activity to secret government testing. But as documented cases, acoustic anomalies, recurring symbols, and post-return psychological effects continue to defy conventional explanation, a more radical hypothesis has gained traction among independent researchers: that Blackwater Forest is not merely a haunted place, but a living intelligence. This concept, known among fringe theorists as the sentient terrain hypothesis, suggests that the forest is not simply the backdrop of the phenomena, but the source. Not a passive landmass being traversed and interpreted by humans, but an active, aware system responding to perception, emotion, and intrusion. In other words, the forest is not where the strange happens. The forest is the strange. Proponents point to several factors that support this view. First is the forest's documented responsiveness. Individuals who enter with the intent to document or expose its secrets are more likely to experience distortion, missing time, or complete disappearance. Conversely, those who enter with respect, silence, or no recording equipment at all have a higher rate of safe exit. This suggests an adaptive intelligence that reacts to intent, something far beyond random hazard. Then there is the phenomenon of predictive placement. Items found in Blackwater, shoes, journals, tape recorders, are often discovered in places that seem chosen for psychological impact rather than randomness. A father searching for his missing son once found a childhood drawing sealed in plastic and placed neatly at the base of a tree, despite the boy never bringing the artwork on the trip. In another case, a team of hikers found their own tent gear set up ahead of them on the trail, despite having just left it behind. These acts imply foreknowledge, spatial manipulation, and a capacity to curate experience for emotional effect. Another clue lies in the feedback loop many survivors describe. The deeper one goes into the forest, the more the environment seems to reflect their thoughts, memories, and fears. Some describe seeing places from their past impossibly replicated in the woods, a childhood bedroom nestled in a grove, a family pet glimpsed between trees. These are not hallucinations in the traditional sense. In several cases, multiple individuals in a group reported seeing the same impossible thing. If these manifestations are real, they indicate a form of responsive projection, one tailored not only to the person, but their subconscious state. Biological parallels can be drawn as well. Fungal networks like mycorrhizae already demonstrate forest-wide communication systems in nature. These underground wood-wide webs allow trees to share nutrients and warning signals across vast distances. Now imagine this principle scaled beyond biology into cognition. A forest whose trees are organs, whose roots are nerves, and whose landscape is a distributed consciousness, massive, ancient, and incomprehensible by human logic. In this analogy, visitors aren't hikers, they're stimuli. The forest doesn't see them as people. It sees them as signals. Patterns in the disappearances also support the intelligence theory. Victims are not chosen randomly, but through a profile of psychological traits, sensitivity to sound, intense emotion, or trauma. It appears the forest identifies who is most resonant with it, who can be reached, reshaped, or retained. The forest does not take indiscriminately. It selects, much like a predator or a researcher. This may explain why so many returnees speak in terms of communion rather than captivity. Those who survive often express a sense of having merged with something vast. One survivor said, "It wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to know me." Another, found after 4 weeks with no memory of how he survived, simply said, "I answered." These are not descriptions of trauma or terror, but something more complex, like communication or transformation. This leads to the most disturbing implication of the theory, that Blackwater Forest is not a place where an entity resides, but that the forest is the entity. Trees, soil, sound, weather, each is a facet of a singular awareness distributed across miles, perhaps eons. It does not speak, because it has no mouth. It does not move, because it is everywhere. It is not bound by time in the way human minds are. It may operate cyclically, emerging only when the conditions, environmental, psychological, or astronomical, are aligned. If this is true, then every strange event, the whispering voices, the spirals, the impossible rooms, the vanishing points, are not random phenomena but expressions. Not messages in a bottle, but the neural firing of a brain made from trees and stone. Visitors experience what the forest thinks. Or worse, what the forest dreams. A sentient terrain would not need language. It would not reason as we do. But it might still learn. The spiral could be its method of recursive memory. The codex its externalized thought. The disappearances could be its experiments, or its attempts at contact. From this perspective, those who vanish are not missing. They have been absorbed, not consumed, but rewritten. The question then is not whether the forest is alive. The question is, what does it want? And more disturbingly, what if it already has it? Among the most bewildering and least understood phenomena reported within Blackwater Forest is the apparent manipulation or fragmentation of time. This goes beyond the subjective sensation of time dilation common in traumatic or high-stress situations. It involves actual temporal discontinuities, missing hours, repeated events, overlapping encounters, and in some cases, the return of individuals carrying knowledge of future events. These occurrences, though rare, form a consistent enough pattern that researchers have begun referring to them collectively as temporal folds. The first recorded case dates back to 1892, when a trapper named Elias Wincombe reportedly emerged from the forest claiming he had only been gone for 3 days. His village, however, had presumed him dead after more than 3 months of searching. Wincombe's rifle was rusted, and his journal, found on his person, contained an entry for every day of his supposed absence, all written in the same ink and with no signs of haste or distress. In his final entry, dated 2 days before his return, he wrote, "The sun blinked wrong. It skipped. I walked in a straight line and came back to the same place. Not similar. The same." Modern cases echo these anomalies with disturbing frequency. GPS watches, smartphone time logs, and weather tracking tools used by hikers and researchers inside the forest have returned corrupted data. Timestamps looping backward, missing hours, or events logged in duplicate. In one investigation, 2 researchers conducting a trail mapping exercise in 2007 walked a marked path that should have taken 90 minutes. Their watches recorded just 12 minutes. Video footage showed them walking in real time for nearly 2 hours, but the footage was heavily distorted in the middle, overwritten by earlier frames. An analysis revealed a 14-minute loop that repeated 3 times, undetectable until frame-by-frame playback. Some individuals describe experiences that go even further, encounters with themselves. One survivor claimed to have seen a version of herself walking a trail ahead, wearing the same clothes and backpack she wore that day, before the figure stepped into a tree line and vanished. Another hiker reported being followed by someone for several hours before finally recognizing the man's face as his own, slightly aged, with a healed scar he did not yet have. The forest seems to fold not only space, but chronology. Disappearance clusters often align with specific dates, many on solstices, lunar eclipses, or during significant geomagnetic events. This has led some to believe Blackwater may be anchored to specific windows of temporal instability, functioning like a living observatory that opens only when cosmic conditions align. These soft points, as they are sometimes called, are believed to be the areas where time is least stable and memory most unreliable. Further complexity arises from artifact dating. Items found within the forest, such as audio tapes, journals, or physical evidence, sometimes predate the person who left them. A field recorder left by a wildlife photographer in 2011 was found in 2014, but analysis of the tape inside contained sounds recorded 4 years earlier, some matching missing persons cases from 2007. The tape had not degraded, and no signs of tampering were found. Its audio included whispers that repeated the photographer's name before he had even set foot in Blackwater. These disruptions are not limited to human witnesses. Trail cameras placed by park officials have recorded animals appearing, disappearing, and reappearing in patterns that defy biological logic. A black bear tagged in 2010 was caught on camera 5 years later with the same physical wounds it had the day it was last tracked. No sign of aging was present. The GPS collar showed no movement across that time, only a single spike in signal in the exact moment the image was captured. Time in Blackwater does not seem to flow linearly. Instead, it behaves like a spiral, a recursive loop that contracts and expands depending on attention, emotion, or presence. This aligns with neurological models of memory processing and perception under altered states of consciousness. Blackwater may function as a cognitive amplifier, reshaping the observer's understanding of sequence and causality. This also ties into the growing number of future imprint cases, instances where returnees describe events, names, or technologies not yet publicly available. In one documented case, a hiker returned in 2018 claiming that the fire in the east will blind the satellites. 2 years later, a rare solar flare knocked out GPS systems across a portion of the eastern United States for 12 hours. Skeptics call this retrofitting. But when multiple predictions come true, pattern emerges. Whether these folds in time are natural, created by the forest, or the byproduct of something else operating within it is unknown. One theory suggests that the forest sits atop a confluence of electromagnetic or gravitational anomalies, an intersection of forces that bend perception and possibly time itself. Others suggest Blackwater is a sentient system running simulations, testing different versions of reality, rewriting outcomes like a puzzle-solving intelligence playing its own world in loops. If so, then those who vanish might not be gone. They may still be inside, walking the same trail endlessly, seconds away from rescue that will never come because the forest has them suspended between instants. In this scenario, time is not a river but a snare, a trap wound tight around memory. In Blackwater, the past may not be behind you. The future may not be ahead. It all folds inward. And once you're caught in the spiral, The forest decides when you leave, if ever. Among all the phenomena associated with Blackwater Forest, few are as widespread and as difficult to disprove as the whisper phenomenon, a category of auditory events that range from faint murmurs in the foliage to fully intelligible sentences spoken in familiar or impossible voices. Unlike traditional haunting narratives where voices are attributed to spirits or residual energy, the whispers in Blackwater exhibit traits of intentional mimicry. They do not simply repeat. They adapt, respond, and imitate. Documented as early as the 1930s, early accounts described gentle singing from the trees, often heard just before someone disappeared. Over time, the reports evolved. By the late 1960s, witnesses were recording whispers that resembled their own voices or those of close loved ones, sometimes those long dead. These events frequently occurred at times of isolation or high emotional stress, indicating a targeted component. The forest does not broadcast. It selects. Linguists and psychoacoustic researchers analyzing survivor accounts found consistent linguistic anomalies in the phrasing of these whispers. Many include recursive sentence structures, reversed syntax, or archaic diction. Others mirror the subject's own internal monologue, repeating thoughts moments after they occur, or finishing half-formed sentences aloud. One researcher coined the term echo phrasing, describing whispers that do not simply imitate human speech, but interact with the listener's cognition directly. This suggests that the phenomenon operates not as a simple auditory illusion, but as a form of cognitive infiltration. The whispers are often described as external but simultaneously internal, originating from both the environment and the mind. They are not hallucinations in the strict sense. In group settings, multiple people report hearing the same phrase at the same time, eliminating purely psychological explanations. Spectrogram analyses of audio taken within whisper-active zones reveal low-frequency layers beneath the audible range. These infrasonic components follow consistent harmonic structures, often centered around 17 to 19 Hz, a range associated with feelings of unease and dread. This frequency is known to induce anxiety, blurred vision, and nausea in laboratory settings. More curiously, layered over these bass pulses are faint phonetic patterns that do not match any known language, yet seem to retain a consistent cadence and rhythm. Some researchers believe this forms the basis of a metalanguage, a prelinguistic or postlinguistic method of communication designed not to be spoken, but felt. Whispers are merely its human-facing mask. The real message may bypass language entirely, embedding itself directly into perception. This would explain the difficulty in recording them. Even when captured, playback is often garbled, desynchronized, or entirely silent. A less discussed but vital part of the whisper phenomenon is linguistic corruption. Extended exposure to the whispers appears to degrade one's grasp of language. Several returnees exhibit semantic erosion, the inability to connect words with their meanings. One journalist, after spending only 2 days in the forest, began substituting words nonsensically in both speech and writing, e.g., "The trees are asleep under the engine of night." He eventually ceased writing entirely, instead drawing loops and interlocked spiral glyphs without explanation. Another victim, a linguistics professor, recorded himself reciting Latin phrases for a documentary segment. Upon reviewing the footage later, every word was replaced by sounds resembling reversed speech and animal vocalizations, though he had no memory of speaking anything but the original text. Forensic analysis confirmed the recording had not been tampered with. The speech had changed in the playback medium alone. Survivors often become carriers of the phenomenon. Months after leaving the forest, some report hearing whispers in their homes, even during waking hours. Audio professionals have documented unexplained murmurs appearing in voice memos, voicemail messages, and streaming audio, even when recorded thousands of miles from Blackwater. These infiltrations seem to follow the individual, raising the possibility that exposure implants a form of resonant frequency in the mind, allowing the whispers to continue remotely. Victims describe a sense of being tuned, as if their brainwaves had been altered to receive transmissions that others cannot detect. These whispers are not always threatening. In some cases, they offer guidance, leading lost hikers toward water or repeating the names of loved ones. This duality has prompted speculation that the forest, or the intelligence behind it, may be testing communicative strategies, learning how humans interpret language, tone, and emotional cues. Some describe the whispers as attempts at comfort. Others experience them as lies, subtle manipulations designed to erode trust in reality. Even more alarming are reports of contagion events. A rescue team that entered the forest after a reported disappearance later began hearing whispers days after exiting the area. None had heard anything while inside. All 6 began experiencing vivid auditory dreams in the same week, dreams that included phrases none could explain: "Fold into breath," "He sees through our words," and "Your voice is his echo." There is no known cure or protection. Soundproofing does not stop the whispers. Noise-canceling headphones may block them temporarily, but most victims say the voices simply find new ways to speak, through vibrations, imagined sounds, or even visual text hallucinations. In one case, a man who had been deaf since birth described feeling words crawling across his skin for weeks after an encounter. The implications are profound. If the forest is using sound to infiltrate human consciousness, it represents not just a haunting, but a form of information warfare, subtle, sensory, and recursive. The whisper is not noise. It is code. A language not meant to be understood, but to be obeyed. As attention surrounding the disappearances in Blackwater Forest has intensified, a new and even more perplexing category of reports has emerged: phantom disappearances. These are cases where individuals are believed to have gone missing within or near the forest, with physical evidence, emotional trauma, and even search operations pointing toward a genuine event, yet no official records, witness statements, or documentation exist. These are not merely forgotten people. They are people who appear to have been erased. In one well-documented case from 1994, a family camping in the southern edge of Blackwater reported their daughter missing after she wandered into the woods one afternoon. A full-scale search operation was launched. Helicopters, K-9 units, and over 60 volunteers combed the region for 3 days. On the 4th day, the girl walked out of the trees unharmed. The rescue was celebrated locally and even covered in a small-town newspaper, with a photograph of her reunion with her parents printed on the front page. Yet today, no such article can be found in any digital archive. The parents are no longer on record in the county where they lived. Property records have vanished. Even the original photo, once stored by the local sheriff's department, is missing. Attempts to locate members of the original search party produced more contradictions. Some recalled the incident clearly. Others denied it ever happened. One search volunteer stated, "I remember the search, the campfires, the map spread across the hood of a cruiser. But no matter how hard I try, I can't see the girl's face. It's like it's been blurred out in my memory." There are multiple instances where material traces of vanished people persist without accompanying human history. A tent, half collapsed, found deep in the forest with a sleeping bag, children's books, and food supplies, but no record of anyone ever purchasing those items, no missing persons case filed, and no matching DNA. The forensic profile is complete and human, but there's no identity to assign it to. In another case, a man was found wandering the edge of the forest claiming to have been lost for 6 days. His ID, work history, and even birth records checked out, until a month later, when those same documents were inexplicably purged from state and federal databases. He now exists only in the memory of the emergency responders who found him. This phenomenon has come to be known by researchers as soft erasure. Unlike typical bureaucratic oversight or data corruption, soft erasure appears to be selective, surgical, and localized, as though entire threads of history are being plucked from the tapestry of reality. In some cases, individuals who claim to remember the missing person begin losing confidence in their own memory, doubting whether the person existed at all. This psychological erosion often spreads, families dissolve under strain, friendships disintegrate, and journals referencing the missing person mysteriously vanish or alter themselves. There are theories that suggest these non-disappearances are not just memory issues or bureaucratic oversights, but outcomes of timeline divergence. In this model, Blackwater is posited to be a node where multiple versions of reality overlap and bleed into one another. Those who vanish may not be taken or killed. They may have simply slid into another version of reality, one where they were never born, or where their presence no longer aligns with the current state of history. If true, this would explain the pattern of erasure, not as an act of malice, but as a natural correction process, like a system rebooting itself after a data corruption. In rare cases, traces of the erased resurface. One ranger reportedly received an envelope containing 6 photographs, images of a family hiking through Blackwater in the 1970s. One image showed a teenage boy whose face bore no match to any local records, but who appeared in a background photo of another family's vacation album decades later, wearing the same clothes. The ranger who received the photos claimed he recognized the boy. He believed the teenager was his older brother, who had vanished when the ranger was a child. But no record of the brother exists, not in birth certificates, school records, or family documents. The ranger's parents, both deceased, had no surviving materials indicating a second son. These cases raise a deeply unsettling question. What does it mean to be missing if you were never officially here to begin with? If memory, identity, and evidence can be bent, or removed entirely, then how many people have entered the forest and vanished, not into the ground, but into non-existence? There are currently independent groups attempting to catalog these phantom disappearances. They rely on analog archives, handwritten notes, printed photographs, film negatives, media less susceptible to digital manipulation or unexplained deletion. However, these too are not immune. Researchers report notebooks going blank overnight, Polaroids fading unnaturally fast, and interviews with witnesses that later contain contradictory audio data. It is as though Blackwater does not merely silence the present. It edits the past. The forest's most terrifying power may not be the ability to consume bodies, but to unmake lives, to rewind their presence until even the idea of them becomes suspect. To erase not through violence, but through forgetting. Not the scream, but the silence after. And in a world increasingly reliant on digital permanence, the thought that a place could still unwrite you, mind, memory, and molecule, is perhaps the deepest horror of all. As the unsolved disappearances, auditory phenomena, temporal fractures, and cognitive intrusions continue to mount around Blackwater Forest, one fundamental question remains unanswered. Why hasn't the forest been sealed off? Given the depth of anomalous activity and the volume of unaccounted cases, any logical governing body would have long since restricted access, declared it a federal no-go zone, or initiated a full-scale investigation. And yet, Blackwater remains open, marked only by a few outdated warnings, decaying boundary signs, and unofficial cautionary tales whispered between locals. Theories regarding this persistent inaction fall into three broad categories: containment theory, political suppression, and metaphysical inevitability. The containment theory suggests that the forest is not just being left alone, it is being deliberately observed within carefully controlled parameters. According to this perspective, Blackwater is too dangerous to fully investigate and too volatile to shut down. Instead, it is quietly monitored, with events documented behind classified programs, while the general public remains unaware of the true threat. The idea here is that letting the forest breathe naturally, without too much interference, minimizes disruption. Researchers in this camp believe the disappearances, the whispers, and the anomalies represent a form of pressure release, failures in the containment system that prevent a much larger rupture. This implies the government or a select group of institutions already understands the nature of the phenomenon. The forest is not sealed because sealing it might provoke it. A living, sentient intelligence, if that is what Blackwater is, could interpret barriers or surveillance as threats. Instead, a policy of passive neglect is applied. Warn quietly, let the locals interpret folklore as fiction, and allow the anomalies to cycle without resistance. Controlled harm, in exchange for wider stability. Political suppression theory offers a darker explanation. According to whistleblower documents and redacted communications that have surfaced through FOIA requests and private investigators, Blackwater may have been tied to early 20th century experiments in cognitive warfare, acoustic manipulation, and narrative fragmentation technology. In this view, the forest's unique characteristics were exploited, perhaps even enhanced, by agencies interested in memory disruption, identity control, or experimental containment fields. What began as a research project may have evolved into a phenomenon beyond control. Under this theory, the forest is not just ignored, it is protected. Individuals or institutions that probe too deeply are discredited, monitored, or, in some cases, quietly removed. Archival records go missing not by accident, but design. Victims' families are either gaslit into silence or financially incentivized to stop asking questions. This is not a matter of scientific confusion, it is an issue of national security. Those who subscribe to this theory point to certain patterns: the repeated failure of journalists to publish long-form exposés, the disappearance of field notes, and the absence of any concrete media coverage beyond vague urban legends. Entire swaths of government-issued maps lack detail over the Blackwater area. Satellite imagery is routinely corrupted or inconsistent. These are not anomalies, the theory claims, they are edits. And then, there is the inevitability hypothesis. perhaps the most unnerving of all. This view suggests that Blackwater cannot be closed because it is not a place in the way we understand places. It is a breach point, a convergence zone where the boundaries between consciousness, reality, and perception thin until they fray. The forest is not dangerous because it hides monsters. It is dangerous because it reflects truth. The spiral, the time folds, the whispers, these are not errors in the system. They are the system, briefly seen. What we call anomalies are reality asserting itself underneath the comforting illusion of linear time and fixed identity. Under this hypothesis, Blackwater is a threshold. It sits on the seam between the comprehensible and the incomprehensible. To seal it would be like trying to fence off gravity. Closing the forest would not stop the phenomena, it would only shift the breach. If Blackwater didn't exist, another threshold would form elsewhere. Because the phenomenon is not the forest. The phenomenon is us. Blackwater only reflects what we cannot face, that identity is fragile, memory is unreliable, time is flexible, and consciousness is not entirely contained within our skulls. The whispers are not foreign. They are the reverberations of thought once it leaves the body. The disappearances are not abductions, they are migrations. Individuals pulled across the membrane of ordinary perception into something older, deeper, and more vast than we can name. The failure to close the forest may be the final admission that those who study it no longer believe it can be closed. Perhaps they once tried. Perhaps the first ones who entered are still walking, still listening, trapped in spirals of awareness they mistook for madness. And so the trailheads remain open. The forest floor continues to receive footprints that vanish without a trace. New stories continue to bloom from the undergrowth, half-seen figures, impossible sounds, memories that bend inward until they break. Blackwater forest waits. It always has. It always will. Because it is not watching us. It is becoming us. If you made it this far, you're already part of the story. The forest may forget names, but whispers remember. Subscribe to MrDarxnight for more tales the daylight dares not tell. Hit the like button if the silence unnerved you, and share if you think someone else might hear what you heard. Drop your thoughts in the comments, but beware. Some echoes answer back. Until next time, stay in the light.